Well, welcome everybody. So good to see so many of you this evening. I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. We start with an invocation, which we observe by a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. And I would love to invite the young people in the room to come on up and lead the Pledge of Allegiance if you're interested and willing. Yes, yes, you are. We're going to do a moment of silence first, and then I'll go like this. Okay, great. Okay.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you both. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Corliss,
Here.
Halliburton,
Here.
Morales,
Here.
Nash,
Here.
Stead,
Here.
Willett,
Here.
all present.
Thank you. Yes.
For personal privilege.
Yep.
I just want to recognize my niece and nephew, Grace and Danny Collado, who are visiting from Utah this week on their spring break. So thanks for joining us. They told me they're going to stay the entire meeting. So I think they're really looking forward to it, and they're not going to leave after the consent agenda. So.
Well, welcome. It's great to have you both tonight. We've got some meeting minutes for approval.
Madam Mayor, I move approval of the minutes for the strategic planning session and new meeting of March 25th, 2025.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Clerk?
Stead,
Yep.
Willett,
Abstain.
Corliss,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Morales,
Yes.
Nash,
Yes.
5 in favor, motion carries.
And next up, we have one item under special business. There's been a request to reconsider CAR 24-6. And Matthew Dennis from the Planning and Zoning team is here.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Welcome.
Madam Mayor, members of council. The item before you is a request for reconsideration of CAR 24-6. This item should look familiar to you as it's a rezone of approximately 5.7 acres from R1C residential traditional to R2 residential compact, generally located at 1519 South Londoner Avenue. This proposal was previously heard by the Planning and Zoning Commission on January 13th, 2025, who unanimously recommended approval, and then heard and approved by City Council on March 4th, 2025. This request has been resubmitted or submitted with the details outlined on your screen and in your report. I would note that the staff memo failed to mention that reconsiderations may only be granted if it's found that the decision does not comply with the development code or with applicable provisions of state, federal law. Planning staff found that the submitted reconsideration request did not demonstrate non-compliance with the applicable code and laws. At the prior hearings, both Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council found that the request met the required findings of the development code for a rezone. In conclusion, the planning team recommends the council not reconsider this request. However, if the council decides to reconsider, a new public hearing will be scheduled and noticed as required by code. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I've got a question. So in the request for reconsideration, they mentioned a couple things that I just wanted to get some clarity on. One was the $30,000 included for improvements on future traffic majors. And I want to make sure that that was part of the approval.
Councilmember Halliburton and members of council, the $30,000 that was the came from the agency comment from ACHD was reflected in the public record.
Okay. And then the second one, I want to make sure that when I made the motion that I also intended to put a condition on for a max of 189 units. I believe that I did that. I believe that that's in the record. And I just want to confirm that because in the motion or in the request for reconsideration, it seemed like there wasn't clarity there.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Halliburton, the specific density unit was included as part of the reason for the decision. rezones technically don't have conditions themselves, but that deliberation and that intent to keep that max density was reflected in the reason statement at 189 units.
Yep. So just to be clear there, I want to make sure that we have a limit of 189 units for this developer on this rezone.
Madam Mayor, if I could,
Go ahead.
Madam Mayor, do we have the reason statement come back to council since we had the decision, or has it not been, has it been too soon since the decision?
Excuse me, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Nash, the reason statement was reflected on the action letter. I believe that was sent the week prior, or the week following the hearing.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, just to be clear there, so in the packet with the appeal, they're appealing the reason statement. And so the reason statement is listed in the packet for the appeal. I noticed it on there. So again, just want to make sure that I'm crystal clear here, that in our approval, we did limit to 189 for this developer.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Halliburton, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Mayor, yeah, it was not an appeal, so there shouldn't be a reason statement because we supported the staff's recommendation. So technically, I think that the staff packet acts as the reason statement in addition to any other deliberation that we have. But that's how I understand that part of it.
But you did, according to the record, because it will go to design review, and you directed that at that, if I remember correctly,
As a condition, yes.
as a condition, going for design review. And while they have things that they look at, one of the limiting factors was going to be 189 units.
That's correct. Yep. And we didn't do it in a development agreement. We did it in a condition.
Yep.
Yes.
All right. Any further questions for Matthew? Thank you.
Madam Mayor, for a motion. I move to grant reconsideration of CAR 24-0006.
Right, for lack of a second, that motion dies.
Madam Mayor, I'd just love to speak to this for a second. I really grappled over this reconsideration until I read this. Until I read this provision of the code, and I'm going to just read that into the record here if I can for the neighbors to better understand my decision, and I think probably others up here on council. But so the code reads, a request for reconsideration shall be filed within 14 days after the decision was made and shall state specific ways in which the decision does not comply with this code or with applicable provisions of state or federal law. Upon reconsideration, the decision may be affirmed, revised, or modified to comply with the provisions of the code or with applicable provisions of state and federal law. So the way that I interpret that is the process of reconsideration is specifically for if we have made an unlawful mistake. So we make a decision that is against city, state, or federal law, which I don't believe our decision was. Then if reconsideration is granted, our code limits that reconsideration as an effort to allow the decision to fall back within those lawful grounds. And again, because I see the decision as having been lawful, I also don't see that we could, under our current code, make that decision to reconsider and make it lawful again, because I think it already is. So that's the reason for my decision and not supporting that motion. Madam Mayor.
There isn't actually, I misspoke. There's not a motion on the table because there wasn't a second. So before we have more deliberation, I'm going to need a motion.
I'd make a second on the motion.
I'm sorry, sir. No. Sure. Okay. I appreciate that. If you'll take a seat, I'd like to get a motion on the table and then happy to explain process to the best of my ability. I will try. No, sir. We have a motion? Oh, I missed that.
Oh, no, we did it. The motion died for lack of a second. So if we're going to debate the motion, we need a motion.
And you made a motion?
I made the motion.
There was, you said we died on a lack of a second. Now we're debating a motion that doesn't exist.
Right, so now we need a motion on the table.
So am I allowed to read to my motion under Robert's rules?
You know what, I'd have to look at the city process. Once a motion dies, you don't get to make the same motion again. They can or can't? No, nope. So, what is happening here is when we receive a request for reconsideration, as the council member explained the process, what's reviewed, council, this actually happens, somewhat regularly. And a request for reconsideration will come in, and then it is up to council to decide whether or not there's information in the request, that warrants a reconsideration, and that's done by motion, and then a vote. And actually, typically, if there's no further motion on the floor, because reconsideration can't happen without a motion being made to reconsider and then being voted on in the majority. And if that motion fails or does not exist, then we move on to the next topic.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I think the problem here is that there's some council members who want to say something. We don't have to make a motion here. We can just let it die without one. I'm going to make a motion that we deny the reconsideration so that council members can have that opportunity.
That is
to comment.
Since everybody wants to speak and the first one didn't get a second, that is the better course of action so that people can
I'm
then
making
speak
that
to their
motion.
reasons.
That we deny
Second.
the
In a
reconsideration.
second.
All right, we have a motion. I'm going to take a Corliss second.
Madam Mayor, thank you, Jimmy, for the procedurally with this. I so appreciate the neighborhood and the comments we've received on this development. I was one that voted against the rezone. And I appreciate the filing for the reconsideration. I would love to see the reconsideration, but as Councilmember Stead plainly read, we have a very, very, very narrow window in which we can consider and put this straight forward. I don't see where there is anything illegal that goes against city or state that would allow us to proceed with a reconsideration.
You already spoke. Okay. Anyone else? Did you want to say something?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I'll just round this out. I was the one who made the motion in the first place. I know I'm the least popular person at the party. I made the motion again so that we could get some comments on the table. I knew that there were some folks who wanted to do it. I read the reconsideration, the request for reconsideration. It was a long one. It was a detailed one. There was a lot of work that was put into it. So I appreciate the amount of work and the effort that was put into it. I appreciate the organizing that your neighborhood has done as well. I know now that you've formed a new, or in the process of forming a new neighborhood association. I think that's great. Working together to put together a stronger neighborhood. But reading through, and I read through all of the different parts of the code that you mentioned in there and all of the different areas. I didn't see an area where I thought that we had made a mistake or that we would need to reconsider. I realize that I disagree with you on this issue and the reasoning for it. But I do believe that we followed the procedure, we followed the code, we got it right. There were 3 votes in favor, 2 against. And so that's why I made that motion again tonight so that we could get those comments on the table. Again, I appreciate you all coming down.
Mayor, thanks to Councilmember Halliburton so that we can have some discussion on this. I know the process is odd, and so I appreciate the clarification and for the opportunity for us to talk about it. I made the original motion to reconsider, and so I'll be voting against your motion to deny because I would like to reconsider. And there's a number of reasons, but the number one reason is the Supreme Court ruled that Boise needs to show its work. The reconsideration is very clear that Boise didn't show its work, and the clarifications asked for on the dais today make it even more clear Boise did not show its work.
I'm going to ask that we just listen. We talked about this last time too, rather than reacting. Is there any further debate? I'm going to restate the motion so that there's clarity on the motion on the table. And it was moved and seconded to deny the request to reconsider.
Yes, that's correct.
Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Stead,
Yes.
Willetts,
No.
Corliss,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Morales,
Yes.
Nash.
Yes.
5 in favor, 1 opposed, motion carries.
Great, thank you. All right. Excuse me, I think that Crystal over here can help you with process issues. Crystal, who's standing up, can help you with process issues for what's next. Yeah. No, that's okay. All right, we're gonna move into the consent agenda.
Madam Mayor, I move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
just a couple of items on here. Oh, hold on.
All right, go ahead.
All right, Madam Mayor, I just wanted to call out some effort that's on a couple of these. We have Dane, our Pathways Plan Manager, here in the room tonight. That usually means that there's something on the agenda that has to do with our Pathways Master Plan. And there absolutely is. There's an agreement with an irrigation district for Spoils Bank. There's also some collaboration with Compass to begin work in exploring the pathways on Spoils Bank as well. So want to say thank you to our staff, Dane, and thank you to folks from Compass, if you happen to be listening in, for your collaboration on this, and with the irrigation district for working with us as well.
Okay. Clerk?
Stead,
Yes.
Willis,
No.
Corliss,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Morales,
Yes.
Nash,
Yes.
5 in favor, 1 opposed, motion carries.
All right, we are going to move into, let's see, I'm checking. We have ordinances on second reading.
Madam Mayor, I ask unanimous consent that all ordinances on second reading be read by number and title only and filed for the third reading calendar.
Without objection.
ORD 11-25, an ordinance CAR 24-1 for property located at 1770 South Maple Grove Road, amending zoning classifications of the city of Boise City to change the classification of real property, particularly described in section 1 of this ordinance, and adjacent rights of way from A-1 open lands to R-2 residential compact, setting forth a reasoned statement in support of such zone change and providing an effective date. ORD 12-25, an ordinance CAR 24-12 for property located at 2272 South 5 Mile Road, amending zoning classifications of the city of Boise City to change the classification of real property, particularly described in section 1 of this ordinance and adjacent rights of way from R-1B residential suburban to R-1C/DA residential traditional with a development agreement, setting forth a reasoned statement in support of such zone change and providing an effective date.
Thank you. And now we will move into public hearings. The first up, hi Maureen, we've got Maureen Brewer for a proposed surplus of some city-owned property.
Madam Mayor, council members, are you able to see the presentation? You got it. Okay. So Maureen Brewer, Housing and Community Development Senior Manager, here to discuss the surplus property at 1329 South Michigan Avenue. This is a single family home that the city of Boise has owned since 2003. We acquired it with federal home funds, and since that time, the required period of affordability has expired. Not unlike other surplus properties that we brought before you in recent months, this property needs a complete rehabilitation, and the costs to do so are prohibitive to maintaining this particular property as affordable housing. You can see here the revenue versus expense. The revenue that we're able to bring in through affordable rent exceeds the annual expenses, and the current repairs needed are approximately $60,000. We initiated this process with City Council on March 11th through a request for public hearing and a surplus resolution, finding that the property is underutilized and not currently being used for a public purpose. And the step we find ourselves at today is, of course, this public hearing and a declaration of surplus and intent to sell. Following approval of the resolution this evening, we will list the property for sale tomorrow. We will take offers through April 14th at 5 p.m. and then sell to the highest bidder. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Madam Mayor. Thanks, Maureen, for walking us through this. Just for clarification for those in the room and those who may be online, can you discuss what happens with the proceeds after this auction?
Absolutely, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Corliss. The proceeds from the sale of this house will be reinvested into our rental housing portfolio that the city currently owns and operates.
Thank you.
All right, this is public hearing. Anybody here for this one? Anybody online? Any further questions for staff? I'll close the hearing and take a motion.
Madam Mayor, I move approval of RES 162-25.
Second.
We have a motion and a second, clerk.
Stead,
Yes.
Willett,
Yes.
Corliss,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Morales,
Yes.
Nash,
Yes.
all in favor, motion carries.
Thank you. And the second item, an appeal of CUP 2428. I'll take a motion to defer that to April 29th, which is our next meeting, because we received some documents late and needed time to review them. So pushing this hearing.
April 29th, you said?
That's what it says on here. I thought it was a different day.
Meeting, though, right?
No, but it's the one that's scheduled for the county. As long as that's a Tuesday, that's the date that
Yeah.
I've let the county know about. For some reason, I thought it was the 26th or something.
Okay. Madam Mayor, I move that CUP 24-28 be deferred to the date certain of April 29th, 2025.
Second.
We have a motion, a second, clerk.
Stead,
Yes.
Willett,
Yes.
Corliss,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Morales,
Yes.
Nash,
Yes.
all in favor, motion carries.
And I should say it was the next available meeting, not the next meeting. Okay. And now we have the appeal of CUP 2441 Moxie Ridge Neighbors. This is why everybody's here, correct? Welcome. We've got David Mosier from staff, and then the appellant, Mary Anderson. Great. Welcome, Mary. We'll have you up, and then you'll see your time up there on the screen when it starts. And then we'll have the applicant, Idaho Power. I've got a couple names here. I see. Okay, great. You'll be testifying tonight. Are you Eric Hackett? Mr. Hackett, thank you. And then do we have the Neighborhood Association, Eric Berg? I don't see him. Eric, are you online? Oh, all right. And then the testimony is open to everybody. So I'll start with this list, and then if there are more of you that are here and you want to testify, I'll just ask that you come up front. We can walk through you, and I'll make sure and see if anybody is online as well. And we have our fire, I'm about to say fire chief, but fire marshal is here to answer any questions from the council. And then after we do all that, then the applicant, does the applicant go as well, or just the appellant? Yeah, okay, that's what I thought. The applicant will have a chance for a rebuttal, and then the appellant will close us out with a final rebuttal. Sound good? Great. Okay. And then I have something, I don't typically read things, but I'm going to read this because I just want to be clear on this one. As you all have likely seen in the news, the Supreme Court made some rulings on the process that we were using for CUPs and appeals of CUPs. And this is an appeal of a CUP that we now have to follow the Supreme Court guidelines until council can pick this up. So I'm just going to explain this. Before we start the appeals, I want to point out the current framework we must operate in, which gives the council few options to make changes to the decisions of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Overturning an appeal is severely limited and can only be done under specific circumstances. The Idaho Supreme Court recently ruled the city of Boise must strictly follow this code as written. The city of Boise plans to restore the oversight of the city council of the CUP process in the coming weeks to create a more transparent and engaging process for residents by changing the standard on appeal for the CUP process. That will, when that happens, if council votes to do that, which they'll be taking it up soon, then any new applications would be taken and considered in the old process. So just wanted to be clear about that beforehand. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. The appellant requests an appeal of the Planning and Zoning Commission's approval of the conditional use permit for the expansion of electrical substation for a battery storage facility located at 2001 East Amity Road on 45.6 acres within a light industrial with airport influence and wildland urban interface overlay zone. As seen here, the site is a large open area containing the Boise Bench electrical substation on the north half of the site along Amity Road, with the expansion area located to the south of the existing facility. The properties adjacent to the south contain residential neighborhood comprised of detached single-family houses. On the north side of Amity Road is a residential neighborhood. To the east, on the other side of Holcomb Road, is a large open area containing power transmission lines. The Boise Pathway Master Plan identifies a planned critical pathway connection along Holcomb Road adjacent to the site. And on February 3rd, 2025, the Planning and Zoning Commission heard a request for a conditional use permit modification to expand the electrical substation on the subject property. The proposed expansion of the substation includes the construction of a 200 megawatt battery storage facility on the south side of the site. It also includes the construction of a small transformer substation on the west side of the property and a relocation of a power transmission line. At the public hearing, the commission voted 4 in favor, 2 opposed to approve the conditional use permit as recommended by the planning team. The battery storage facility is a passive use that don't generate any significant additional traffic on the adjacent roadways and will be screened from the surrounding neighborhood. None of the improvements are located within the hillside area adjacent to the south. The site's perimeter wall will be set back 150 feet from the adjacent neighborhood, and the batteries themselves will be set back about 200 feet from the neighborhood. In addition, the applicant is planning to install, and a condition of approval will require, the construction of a 10-foot wide landscape buffer containing street trees and a 12-foot wide detached multi-use path along Holcomb Road abutting the property to the intersection of Amity Road. On February 13, 2025, the Moxie Ridge neighbors appealed the Planning and Zoning Commission's decision to approve the CUP modification to install the battery storage facility based on these grounds. The appellant contends that the use will create a material negative impact on the surrounding neighborhood. The specific design standards for the substation are not being met, and it conflicts with the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan. The appellant's first grounds for the appeal is that the project will create a negative material impact on the adjacent neighborhood, and that these are in regards to fire safety, environmental, and noise impacts. The Planning and Zoning Commission considered these impacts on the adjacent neighborhood and noted that the fire department stated they can improve the project with conditions. And to address the fire concerns discussed at the hearing, the fire department followed up with a supplemental letter stating that they can apply the standards from the 2018 and the 2024 International Fire Code as needed to this project. It'll also comply with the most recent Fire Protection Association 855 standards. And the commission also noted that the battery designs has built-in fire safety and monitoring systems, and also the facility will be kept clean of vegetation, and the battery enclosures will be placed on concrete pads and provide fire separation between the units. To address the appellant's noise concerns, the Planning and Zoning Commission noted that that Idaho Power conducted a noise study indicating the ambient daytime noise sound levels of 55 decibels at the facility, which is an approximate equivalent of a quiet urban neighborhood. Also, that the batteries have been set back about 200 feet from the adjacent residential neighborhoods and behind a screen wall. This separation will reduce noise on the adjacent neighborhood. The next ground for appeal for this project is that it will create a visual impact on the adjacent neighborhood, and it doesn't comply with design standards. The project provides an 11-foot high solid screen wall with landscape buffer between the project and the residential neighborhood and the street as required by the development code. I would note that this will provide screening from the site to the adjacent residential neighborhood to the south that are currently at the level of the facility. I would also note that the homes on top of the ridge to the south are approximately 800 feet away from the project and about 90 feet higher in elevation than the facility because they sit on top of that bench. The project is consistent with the policies of the comprehensive plan. There are several policies that promote increased use of renewable resources, and public facilities and infrastructures need to meet the city's future energy needs. In addition, the project is supported by the goals of the city's of the Boise City's Boise Energy Future, a community-wide energy plan, and the Boise Climate Action Roadmap. There are goals in the comprehensive plan that address protecting residential neighborhood. However, the intent of these are to ensure that residential infill development development create a compatible transition with the adjacent uses, provide good building designs, and install pedestrian bike-friendly streetscapes. However, the comprehensive plan does also address situations similar to this where we have commercial uses and industrial uses adjacent to residential neighborhoods. The policies in this situation in the comprehensive plan encourage creating a transition between uses, which would include a large buffer and landscape screening. And this project provides a 200-foot setback from the batteries to the neighborhood and with a landscape buffer and a solid screen wall. The slide here also shows the larger area. The adjacent residential neighborhood was approved in 2018 and it abuts industrial developments to the north, south, and west. And to the north, there's also the Boise Bench substation, which has been in operation since the 1950s. In addition, these properties to the north, south, and west of the overall Moxie neighborhood are designated industrial on the comprehensive land use map, and as such were intended to be developed as industrial uses. In summary, the planning team recommends that the City Council deny the appeal and uphold the Planning and Zoning Commission's decision to approve the CUP. The submitted grounds for appeal do not demonstrate an error with the Planning and Zoning Commission's decision. Thank you.
Questions for David?
Madam Mayor, David, could you go back to the slide that talked about the wall, specifically with the map? Can you go to I think it's the next one, the one before. Yeah, that one. Is the black line here is the screening wall?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, that is correct. The black line indicates the screen wall.
Maybe I would just ask the applicant to speak to why the screening wall kind of jumps out and gets closer to the property line. I just have questions about fire access around there. It seems like there might be some type of road, but I can't really tell the scale well enough to know what type of access is there. I would just be concerned about limiting access on one side when we have pretty broad access on the back side closer to the homes.
Would you like the fire department to speak to that?
We might need the applicant to explain it first, why it's
Okay.
like that. But I assume it's because those are closer to residential houses, but.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, I think where it jogs out, I think you're on the west side. Where it jogs out is going around an actual smaller substation that feeds the and the infrastructure for that substation where it feeds the battery storage. That's why it jogs out.
Okay.
Madam Mayor,
the applicant can address that too.
Madam Mayor, question for you, David. So this area, just so I'm clear, this area is already zoned for light industrial. Is that right?
Madam Mayor, members of council, that is correct.
And so, Madam Mayor, so can you, other examples, other allowed uses in light industrial, it might be like an auto repair shop, metalworking shop. Is that right? Are there any other examples that come to mind for that use?
Madam Mayor, members of council, other light industrials we tend to see, or light industrial uses we tend to see in this, or would be trucking terminals, warehouses, manufacturing facilities that do not use or implement more toxic or materials such as that nature, or have outdoor storage of that.
Great.
But they could definitely include auto repair or mechanical or heavy truck sales and repair of those type of equipment.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Mhm.
David, is there anything in our code that would be like specifically address battery facilities or things that might be either real or perceived risks to public safety?
Madam Mayor, as the council, there's nothing specific in our code. I mean, we address material negative impact, but that's sort of a broad term, and it's usually applied to like physical impacts onto the property, such as noise, odor, fumes, gas, sound, other type of emissions is what that finding is trying to address.
Okay.
Anything further? All right, thanks, David. And now we'll hear from the appellant. Mary, welcome. You can pull that down a little bit if you need to.
I think it's
Oh,
okay.
Oh,
Is it
wow,
okay?
it's like, it's
It was
perfectly set for you.
Put here for me. Right. I've not done this. I don't know how much time we have.
That's
I
okay.
don't know.
It'll go on here. I'm gonna have it pop up because it'll tell me. I think it's 15
Good grief. I hope I don't talk that long.
minutes. Yep, 15 minutes. I mean,
Okay.
yeah, and please just feel relaxed. It's good to have you here. This is part of the process, and you don't have to use 15 minutes if you don't want to. And everybody comes up here feeling a little nervous, and we're all just regular people. So welcome.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Very much.
And the whole crowd left. That's right.
Okay, so Mary Anderson. I live in Moxie Ridge neighborhood, and I submitted the appeal on behalf of Moxie Ridge neighborhood and Southeast Boise neighborhoods as well. And put my glasses on. I apologize. And the appeal is based on one of the things that was spoke to by David is the negative material impact that this will have, and there are many different concerns around this with environmental concerns should there be a catastrophic event. Obviously, there's concerns about gases, there's concerns about water contamination. What will it do to our aquifer that runs right there? There's wells by Viola Water right there, and the aquifer runs west in Boise. So, there's concerns about that. Obviously, the big concern is fire. That's one of the biggest concerns we have. And there's different, to me, in my mind, two different types of fire. There's internal to the batteries themselves. Lithium-ion batteries as storage is an up and coming technology right now. And as was asked just a second ago, for Boise City Code, painfully, I went through all of them. There isn't a whole lot for BESS. There is obviously for residential, if you have, solar power, you're installing, batteries in your garage, this is completely different. And then there's the threat to external fires. And I know that the containers are fire resistant, which is great. But as we saw in 2008, the fire that was started on Holcomb Road at a power pole, 55-mile-an-hour winds in August, our hottest month of the year, embers travel. We lost 20 homes. Someone lost their life, unfortunately, in that event. And we don't know what'll happen. At the Melba substation, which I do understand is a completely different setup than what this will be. The way I look at this is the containers are manufactured, and there are flaws in manufacturing, and there is a mass amount of containers that are going to go into this facility. Then they're built and put together by human beings. And by nature, we are not perfect. The Melba substation fire had a flaw that caused a leak by water that caused a fire. What's to prevent that from happening in one container out of all the containers that'll be there at the substation? It was great that Idaho Power, they listened to the community back in the fall, and they set everything back another 50 or 100 feet. I apologize. I can't remember exactly. But for the neighborhoods and the people in the community there, that doesn't make any kind of difference, especially when you're talking about fires and how quickly things can travel, environmental impacts, air quality. And then the emergency response plan, we know that the fire department is going to do everything they absolutely can. They are limited, and it's kind of a big area in Southeast Boise, and you don't know what winds are going to be like. You don't know how things are going to go when there's something catastrophic. They will have to react, and we just don't know what that'll look like. For Idaho Power, and I do want to actually thank Idaho Power. We had a community hosted event to come and learn about the project more a couple weeks ago and answer questions. And I tell you what, Idaho Power showed up in force. They were fabulous. They talked through everything. We actually shut the library down and got kicked out because there were so many questions, and they were willing to answer them, as well as the fire marshal and our deputy fire operations. That's what it was, Aaron. They came as well, and it was really, really great that everybody did. And through all of this, though, there is the question of what is the backup plan for this? Idaho Power is a very large, diverse company, and you don't have a project of this magnitude without a backup plan. And I understand that there's a cost. There's a cost to move this battery farm somewhere else, because they have to do transmission lines to the battery farm and back to the substation. But that cost is nothing compared to our community, our neighborhoods, our homes, and potentially our lives should there be a catastrophic event. And it's unforgivable. There's just, you can't recover from things like that. We've seen way too many things happen. And I realize battery factories are totally different. I know a lot of people bring up what happened in California. That's a factory. Storage is totally different. But there are bad things that have happened with battery farms as well. Sorry, I'm just checking my notes. I apologize. I know that there's going to be other folks that speak with very similar information that probably go into more detail. There have been others that have spoken to and shared concerns about safety and security. We understand that Idaho Power probably can't go through those details because of safety and security for those reasons. So, you know, with those things and with the threats that we have with this being up and coming technology, with, as to the point made earlier, that there's not really codes for this. So how can we approve this when it meets codes that aren't in existence? It's a little bit strange there. You know, I asked that this project be denied, not as a project, just the location. This could be moved somewhere else, really. That's everything I have.
Some council members might have questions, and I'm just going to check.
Yeah.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. You came up here and spoke very well. I'm always a nervous, you can ask anyone. When I came up to speak, I was a nervous wreck. I appreciate the neighborhood coming together and addressing the concerns and having the public meeting for Idaho Power to come out there. I just had one point of clarification. You had mentioned a question on their backup plan, and I'm just not want to make certain I'm clear on what type of backup plan. Is that if there's a failure or a backup plan on a location?
Yeah, for the project itself.
For the overall project,
yeah,
if it wasn't
a project of this magnitude, there has to be a backup plan of where else they could move this to, where else it could go. There are other properties that we've been able to research and find that we know are out there. Again, we know cost-wise, it's not ideal for Idaho Power. But that's the question that I know I have. And then again, we understand that Idaho Power may not be able to answer that publicly, and that's okay. But it's a question that should be answered for the city council.
Thank you for the clarification.
Welcome.
Madam Mayor, just a quick question.
Yeah.
Thank you for testifying or not testifying, presenting. Great job. I just had one question of clarification. You had mentioned a concern about air quality, and the way that I understood it, you were talking about air quality in the event of a fire.
Yeah, of
and
a
I want to make
catastrophic event.
okay,
Yes.
But not air quality concerns with the regular operations of the business, but in a
No.
disaster.
No, correct.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Madam Mayor. Yeah, I just echo, you're doing great.
Thank you.
It is intimidating. You're doing awesome. I'm always amazed at folks who come in and just talk so eloquently about the place that we love. So thank you. Thank you for caring, and thank you for being here. I was struck by the question you had about codes not being in existence. And I'm assuming you're talking about there might be some sort of technology that is being used in terms of that codes don't address. Could you flesh that out for me?
It was the question that was asked earlier by a council member about the city codes and for battery farms specifically.
Got it.
Right.
Thank you.
Right.
Madam Mayor, I know I'll add to what everybody's saying, but Lucy and I, right before the meeting started, we're talking about how we both get so nervous before these meetings too. So it goes around for sure. I wondered, you heard my question to the staff about the light industrial use.
Yes.
Are there so in our code, it is zoned light industrial, which means that basically there are innate uses that are allowed within that. You heard some of those: a trucking terminal, a metal workshop, an auto repair shop. Are there uses that I guess that would be more desirable within that, or is it the light industrial zoning? Trying to just better understand, is it this just specifically the batteries because it's not mentioned? Is that that's
honestly, I hadn't thought about the light industrial zoning, but when you asked the question, as I was sitting there, I was thinking about it, and I'm like, wait, would these really be considered light industrial?
Yeah.
The substation, we understand. When we bought our homes and they were built, like my home was built 2.5 years ago in that neighborhood, and I understood the substation's there. It's been there a really long time. For those of us that grew up here in Boise, we know it's been there. And so we know what we got into. We know what we got into with the industrial area. There's warehouses. There's a warehouse I can see from my front porch, you know, off towards Federal Way. But this seems like it is so much more than that, with these batteries and then the new transformers that they have to put in as well. That's the jutted out area that was asked about. So I would question if they're really light industrial. I don't know what all qualifies as that, but I think that's going to be a great question. And I don't know what else they could do. I know that there was a solar farm proposed in West Ada County that was denied by the commissioners there because of concerns by the community. And I just think that if this can be located somewhere else with less threat to neighborhoods and the community, it's going to be far better for everybody. Really.
Okay, Madam Mayor, can I just go back though to the allowed, I don't know, I'm not familiar with the CUNA project. It could be that it was a different zoning or it needed to be,
I don't know. I don't know.
you know, annexed or whatever. I don't know what the answer
Mhm.
is. But so there's a lot of things that could happen in light industrial, including these things like a trucking terminal or a metal workshop or something like that. To me, though, those all seem noisier, more pollutants, more all of these things. So I guess I just wanted to see if that was also your perception or the neighborhood's perception of that, I guess, or is it the light industrial altogether? That's the hard pill to swallow.
Yeah, I think really it's the batteries themselves, right? You know, lithium ion batteries by nature, I've learned way too much about them in the last couple of months, more than I probably ever wanted to in my life. And because they're up and coming technology, the storage of them as well, like how we want to use them in a battery farm is still up. And what don't we know right now that we would learn from something terrible that may happen at our substation?
Yeah, thank you.
So I think it's the batteries themselves, the containers.
Got it.
The farm itself.
Madam Mayor, Mary, thank you for coming. And your presentation was awesome. Really appreciate that. I did have a question for you. I found in my limited time being able to serve our neighborhoods, when a project comes before us, there's often things that I've never thought about and I need to research. So, for example, I didn't really know anything about asbestos until a project came before us, and it opened up a lot of opportunities to think about that and some things that we're working on. This is one of those projects where I didn't fully understand how these kinds of batteries worked and why they were needed. So it's been a very interesting project to follow. I'm curious so I'm knowing that you two have gotten wrapped up in this. You probably didn't really think about these batteries at all before this project came before you. In your considerations, conversations with neighbors, research, have you found communities that have been instilling code or maybe kind of on the forefront recommendations that maybe we should be looking at? Is there anything that you've seen that would make you feel that would be of interest if this project was to go through?
Yeah, that is a really great question. And I wish I had all my information in front of me. There have been places, and honestly, I want to say they're in the East Coast somewhere and probably not in as much of a fire zone as Idaho tends to be. We're kind of a tinderbox as it is. But I could go find it and send it later, but it won't do any good if you guys vote tonight.
I'm gonna jump in here because Mary, sorry, excuse me. I need to tighten this up.
Okay.
Given the findings of the Supreme Court. And what I was going to ask you was if you would please share that information with council members.
Sure.
With Jordan and with to city council at cityofboise.org. You can get them all. I'd love to be copied too.
Yeah.
So that we can start to look at that. But due to the kind of tight window that we have, we need to tighten the conversation back up. Sorry, council member.
Like pushing boundaries. Sorry.
Okay.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
just some clarification so I make sure I understand what you're saying. We can only consider the same information that happened in the planning and zoning meeting. So if conversations start to go in a different direction and it wasn't involved in their decision making at the planning and zoning, then we have to disqualify.
Yeah,
that
and
information.
I'm not going to be able to perfectly rein us in every time, but when we move into a discussion about future policies, to me, that's pretty clear. That's not part of the decision making tonight. And so I checked in with legal, and that's why I did that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Further questions? Do you have anything else? Okay, sorry. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Very much.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, City Council members.
Okay, now we have Idaho Power. Eric, the applicant. Welcome.
I am going to have to raise it a little bit. Yep. All right. Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. My name is Eric Hackett. I'm here representing Idaho Power Company. I serve as the Projects and Resource Development Director and have general oversight over projects such as the Boise Bench Battery project. A lot of this is already on the record, or all of it is on the record, and so I'm just going to highlight a few general points that I want to reference in relation to some of the comments actually that I can try to answer here, and certainly available for questions. I also have, after I go through the overview within my time limit, I will have a colleague come up to talk about a few of the specific code compliance aspects of our request for approval of the CUP or denying of the appeal. So I'll talk a little bit about the battery selection and why the Boise Bench substation. I know that's a question that's already come up. I do want to highlight some of the public outreach we've undergone and some of the revisions we've made. And certainly I'll talk a bit about safety, emergency response, and some of the sound mitigation before we have Josh come up to follow me. So first, I just want to highlight, we've gone through a very rigorous, very extensive process. It took about 18 months to 2 years. When we develop any sort of new project related to new resources, we have to first identify a need. And so we establish a 20-year horizon where we look what's called an integrated resource plan. And that's published every 2 years. And what that really does is look at our electricity needs, meaning customer usage, versus our resources attributable to then serve that need. And when we see a deficit, we then have to run a competitive solicitation to go seek market proposals that is resource agnostic, meaning it could be anything from renewable energy to storage to new hydro. We go out to the market and seek competitive solicitations that we evaluate on both a qualitative feasibility perspective as well as a quantitative economic review. And we received almost 200 bids across Idaho and really the Pacific Northwest. And through that evaluation and selection, we ultimately settled on the Boise Bench Battery Energy Storage Facility as one of many projects that we've not only installed over the last couple of years, but intend to install over the next really 3 to 5 years. And I'll just note that that entire process is overseen by both the Oregon and Idaho Public Utility Commission. And maybe most importantly is we have received a Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity, or a CPCN. And what that really says is that we have discussed the process we went through in making this selection, and the Regulatory Commission has deemed it a prudent process as well as a prudent need and a prudent decision on the behalf of our customers as a least risk, least cost resource that we ultimately plan to put into service in 2026. So batteries are a very reliable and affordable choice for our customers, and that is batteries serve a specific niche, which is they're a 4-hour term storage apparatus, which is the batteries that we have procured. And what that does is make sure that we have the ability to dispatch those batteries when customers' need is the highest. And so in Idaho, we're particularly sensitive in the late evening hours of the summer when people are coming home and air conditioners are high, or it's hot out and pumps are running. And so batteries serve a need when solar and wind and other resources are starting to ramp down for the evening, where we can really discharge and control the batteries such that we get an extra 4 hours of what ends up being generation, albeit storage at the moment. And because of those generally small scale compared to other types of resources, They're also very affordable and have helped us keep our rates extremely low. Again, this was already mentioned, but it certainly is in line with the comprehensive plan and certainly Boise Energy's future plan as it promotes large-scale utility infrastructure. In so much that over the next couple of years, we'll actually have about 550 megawatts of battery deployments. And I just highlight this because Boise Bench is not unique in and of itself as a single battery facility across our property. We have roughly 10 projects that are either installed and operating or will be installed before the end of 2026. That 550 megawatts is substantial contribution to our peak and our customer needs. And so therefore batteries have been deployed really system-wide starting in 2023. And then why the Boise Bench substation? As I mentioned, the same process we utilized to evaluate the project economically was also evaluated to make sure the project could be feasible. And what feasibility means is how does it interconnect to our system? How does it store and ultimately discharge energy? And what sort of land use do we have? And so what I'll just highlight here is that in our case, we very much believe that battery is just an extension of other electrical infrastructure. And so we think it fits very nicely in light industrial. It is somewhat new in general and certainly in Idaho, but it's not overly new nationwide and worldwide. And in fact, from a rough approximation, there's, I think, 50 gigawatts of batteries installed worldwide compared to this being 200 megawatts. So orders of magnitude over the last 5 to 6 years. And frankly, that is how codes continue to get developed and why we've seen the incident rate drop immensely to be less than 1 incident per gigawatt installed over the last couple of years. And so they become more and more safe as the technology's been advanced, the design parameters, the codes, and the standards. A little bit of discussion about how we've engaged the public. And I appreciate Mary has highlighted a few of these points, but we did have a public open house and we sent invitations. We had some participation. We did respond to the request to attend the neighborhood meeting on March 19th. And a couple points I'll make is that throughout the discussion with the public and frankly with planning and zoning staff, we've also had great participation from the fire marshal. He's obviously here again tonight. And what that really relates to is not only the potential revisions we have made to try to be more compliant with the code, but also mitigate neighbors and customers' concerns, but also proves that we have a good working relationship with the fire marshal to ensure that we establish plans going forward to make sure that we are in compliance with all codes for the installation itself, and certainly as it relates to emergency response and training. So just a quick overview of the project, and I know you've seen this, but just a different perspective. So you can see the existing Boise Bench substation south of Amity and west of Holcomb. And the property that we own is pretty much everything around the Boise Bench substation. The particular parcel is on the east side, which is the right side of this screen. When we first came in for our application, we had a fenced area that took up most of that vacant land to the south of our existing facility. After the public outreach and discussion with the fire department and planning and zoning, we've actually removed that southern portion. And what we intend to do is by reducing the size of the batteries themselves, we've actually reduced the total megawatts. We originally applied for 300 and we're now at 200. It's allowed us to move our facilities both west and north to ensure that we have as much space between the homeowners as possible. And so we've shifted our batteries as far north and we've shifted the substation as far west. And I will point out that that road is going to be maintained as a drivable pass through around the outside of that substation facility that you were asking about earlier, Councilmember Nash. So that's allowed us to have 200 feet of setback, as mentioned earlier. And just a few of the ways that we accomplish that, we're reducing the size of the battery, ultimately moving the substation and moving the fence north or the screening wall. So as that translates into safety and security, just a couple points I'll make is that While it is true that the IFC in the city of Boise's code is older, the fact of the matter is we're committed and will be committed through conditions in coordination with the fire department that we are meeting industry applicable codes regardless of what's applicable necessarily in this city. And so that is different codes for the International Fire Code, the National Fire Protection, I think I said agency earlier. But we will be meeting the industry codes. And there was a question earlier about other cities and states implementing new codes. That is in fact happening where deployments are significant. California, New York, and frankly, many others.
I'll ask you, we don't need to go into what other codes are happening other places in the same way I cut off Mary. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. So in our ability to meet these codes and standards, we will also be developing what's called an emergency response plan, and that we will do that in concert with Boise Fire. We will also then, with our manufacturer, with ourselves, and with actually one of our colleagues here from Fire Risk Alliance, who's a nationally recognized fire engineer and firefighters, will develop an emergency response plan to make sure that we are meeting all the codes and ensure that we have the ability to respond to any sort of emergency if need be. And I just want to highlight here that the battery containers are made up of all these smaller components. And at each level, there's layers of protection, and whether that's mica tape to ensure that fire doesn't propagate or spread. At each level, these are tested and have to be compliant with Underwriters Laboratory, the NFPA, and other codes and standards. And those are the codes that we will ultimately be required to follow. And from there, those containers go into a site design, which we've anticipated with setbacks. We'll have a perimeter fence. There'll be no vegetation inside of the fence. It will be graveled yard. And then we, of course, will prepare and train the fire department accordingly.
I'm sorry, Madam Mayor. Did you say Idaho Power will be responsible for training the fire department on safety around this?
Yeah, so we will work with the battery manufacturer as well as the experts such as Fire Risk Alliance to develop an emergency response plan that they are comfortable with as far as the response plan related to the hazards that would exist or the hazards that may exist during an emergency situation.
Okay.
And last from me is we did a sound study for a couple days, day and night, focused on monitoring location 3 and 4, which are at the southern end of our property. And I think David actually mentioned earlier that we observed decibel levels of 46 to 53. We have revised the design, installed the wall, and we've actually installed some baffles on the equipment itself. And the batteries themselves will only contribute about 40 to 47 decibels. With that, I think Josh is going to come up and finish out for us.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. Do you need my address? Okay. Thank you. 251 East Front Street, Suite 310 in Boise. As Eric has demonstrated, and as agreed by the city's Planning and Zoning Commission, this application meets all of the requirements for approval. First, the subject property is large enough and it's uniquely suited. This is a logical expansion of an existing use, which Idaho property, on this subject property, which Idaho Power had the foresight to purchase in the 1950s. The subject property, as has been mentioned, is zoned light industrial, and an electrical substation is allowed, an allowed use with a conditional use permit. And importantly, the subject property is large enough that the use can be maintained on the property while maintaining 4 times the required setback from the adjacent residential neighborhood. Third, as noted in the staff report, the proposed use is consistent with numerous policies and goals of Blueprint Boise and the city's comprehensive plan. And in particular, this project helps the city meet its goals with regard to renewables. Boise City Code requires let's see if I can click forward here. Boise City Code requires appeals to follow a prescribed procedure, and I appreciated, Madam Mayor, you reading that the note into the record at the beginning, because we're still under the current city code, not the proposed amended city code. And I think that's important to recall here. Use of the word shall in these sections of Boise City Code denotes mandatory requirements as opposed to anything optional. In its initial appeal filing, which was submitted to Boise City on February 13th, the appellant was required to first identify the section of Boise City Code or other law that was incorrectly applied or violated by the Planning and Zoning Commission, and then second, to describe how the Planning and Zoning Commission's decision incorrectly applied or violated that section of Boise City Code or other law. And then the appellant was required to limit all of its subsequent arguments to those items of error, quote, items of error and sections of this code and applicable state and federal law listed in the appeal filing. These appeal requirements are designed and implemented to enable the parties to determine whether the Planning and Zoning Commission erred and made a mistake, or whether the appellant, as in this case, merely disagrees with the outcome and with Planning and Zoning Commission's decision. In this matter, the appellant failed to follow these mandatory requirements. The initial appeal filing failed to identify any code sections. And in their subsequent memorandum, although they mentioned 2 code sections, they didn't describe how those 2 code sections applied or were misapplied by the Planning and Zoning Commission in reviewing this application. As you know, the appellant bears the burden in this case of demonstrating that the Planning and Zoning Commission's approval of Idaho Power's CUP application somehow was in error. The appellant can't meet that burden because none of what they've presented or submitted in writing has referenced code sections and how the Planning and Zoning Commission made any error, and they've failed to argue a valid basis for the appeal. Instead, there have been a series of grievances with the, if I may have an extra 15 minutes or 15 seconds, excuse me.
No.
15 minutes.
I will say a last sentence, not a run on.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. In this case, appellant simply disagreed with the result that was reached by the Planning and Zoning Commission.
All right, thank you. Questions for the applicant?
Madam Mayor. This is for I'm sorry, what's your name?
I'm Josh Leonard.
Josh.
Yeah.
It seems like might be a shifting legal landscape related to liability of power companies. Could you speak to that? Like, I think what do they call this? The Standard of Care Act, but that there's going to be. Madam Mayor, I just have to say I'm a little uncomfortable with having a public hearing about a facility that may pose some serious risk to us and not kind of vetting out those risks, especially when fire wasn't at the previous hearing. I mean, if we're taking this to like the nth degree on like how strict we should be about what's in the record, I mean, I would say that fire shouldn't even be able to present, which is not what I'm proposing. So I'm just
sure
going to be a little
I would
nervous.
prefer that we not be as tight as we are. I'm also trying to protect the liability of the city in this instance, in this hearing, which is why I'm looking back to the attorney on this stuff. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would just say that I think that's important and good and wise of you. At the same time, I want to make sure we're protecting our safety too.
Sure.
With this. So,
to be clear, I care about safety as well.
You do? Okay.
Madam Mayor, I think I can get this one. So I read through the transcripts.
Oh wait, but he's.
Oh, you're still going?
Yeah, he's gonna.
Sorry, I haven't asked my question yet.
Oh, I thought you gave up. I thought you gave up.
There's a shifting legal landscape related to this, and okay, we good?
Yes.
All right. What I'm concerned is it seems like your liability is restricted to you following the plans that you propose, and that's it. And so, could you just speak to this, because it seems like we're letting power companies become self-regulatory agencies unto themselves. Sure. And could you just speak to liability that the power company might assume should there be a problem?
Sure, thank you. And Madam Mayor, and Council President Nash, I'm familiar with the bill that you're speaking of. I wasn't updated today on its current status. I don't know if it's been approved or if it was sent to the governor. I don't know that off the top of my head. I can also tell you that even with the liability restrictions that are contained in that bill, the Idaho Power specifically is still governed by the Public Utilities Commission, and is still subject to their requirements in terms of safety protections and things along those lines. I can also tell you that I don't believe that bill is written to say exactly what the sponsor of that bill may have thought it said.
That's never happened in the legislature.
That's never happened. But I can tell you that I think that there is still liability here for even things that are according to plan.
Madam Mayor, easier question. I read through the transcripts and the closing statements. I think Commissioner Danley talked about how you had not only met code, but you had exceeded code, gone beyond. And I'm trying to understand a little bit about what those things are. So the sound mitigation, is the sound mitigation something that was required in our city code for this process?
No, Madam Mayor and Councilmember Halliburton. There was a requirement to mitigate negative
impacts. Yep.
Yeah, and so it wasn't specifically speaking in code to sound necessarily, but that's one of those potential negative effects that needed to be mitigated.
Okay, thank you. So 11-foot wall, that's not something I see a lot of times on council. I'm guessing that went beyond code or was part of that limiting those negative effects. Is that?
Great question, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Halliburton. Specifically with regard to this type of use, there is a section of city code that references another section of city code that requires a wall of at least the height of the items that are intended to be screened. In this case, those items, the batteries, sit on a small concrete foundation and are 10 feet tall. That's why the 11-foot high of the wall is 11 feet tall.
Great. And then could you speak to any other sort of bullet points as far as not where you met code, but where you went beyond code when you're working with the neighbors?
Sure, and I'm going to defer a little bit to Eric here, but the biggest one is setbacks, and in maintaining that setback inside that wall with gravel to ensure that there's no consumables or fire fuel for those external or internal fire events. Required in this zone, the light industrial zone, to have uses like this. Uses like this in the light industrial zone are required to be 50 feet from adjacent residential. In this case, the use itself is 200, with the wall being about 150.
Yeah, any other bullet points there? So seems like we got them all. Thank you.
Yeah, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I have a couple of questions coming from what was discussed with planning and zoning, just for clarification of those, or not clarification of those, just to, if you can maybe relay the information that was shared there. I think there was discussion on if this storage facility was built out in the desert, what are the impacts? Is there energy loss, cost consideration that was explained there?
Yeah, that discussion was twofold, both in operational characteristics as well as affordability. And so I think those were my points that I had made. And really, the further we are away from a central hub, then there are costs added because we have to build transmission to connect the facilities. But generally speaking, the further away we are, there's also electrical losses, and so they become less efficient. And so right in the hub, we have effectively no losses, and therefore the nameplate capacity of the facility is what we ultimately realize on the system. The further away we are and the more transformation or line miles that it has to travel, we get less beneficial operational characteristics. That being said, we do have facilities that are in other rural areas, but it's based on the land that we own and can ultimately build upon.
Okay. Thank you. Madam Mayor, follow up. Also in there is mentioned that of the projects that were proposed, I think there was 200. There was not another 200 megawatt battery storage facility. Is that correct?
So of the 200 projects, roughly, there was actually quite a myriad. And so the way we go through the evaluation is we don't look at a one-for-one project to meet that deficit that I described. It could be a combination of projects that ultimately are least cost, least risk pursuant to the Public Utility Commission. So we would compare a 200 megawatt project with a couple other 100 megawatt projects, for instance. And frankly, this project alone doesn't actually solve our need. And so that's actually why we have additional projects coming online in 26. So regardless of being an exact match for a secondary project, there are alternatives that are evaluated that ultimately meet the same deficit need through some combination.
Okay. And Madam Mayor, follow another question. In there, it is mentioned we want to keep that hub of electricity, and this was part of what was on record with planning and zoning, that we're assuming the load from the city of Boise or nearby. Are we to then presume from that this will be built and that electricity will stay close by within the city, county, or state?
That's a complicated question. And the simple answer is once it connects to the grid, electricity will go wherever physics allow electricity to go. But depending on the time of the day or the season, wherever those load pockets are, which naturally it is the city of Boise or the greater Boise Valley, most energy flows from all directions around Boise into the Boise area. So it's likely that the battery discharge during the evenings, especially in the summer, would serve local Boise residents for the simple fact that we're probably importing energy from outside of the Boise Valley to serve the needs because it is the greatest in the city and in the metro areas.
Okay, thank you very much.
Madam Mayor, in the CUP application, under fire prevention, it says that there are no sprinklers related to this. Is that intentional, or is it an oversight, or can you not put out a lithium fire with water? Help me understand this.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Councilman Nash. It's the latter. Water does not put out a battery fire. When the battery goes into thermal runaway, it has to be burnt out. And so that's why the containers are all built with individual unique containers so that they can't propagate to adjacent containers, as opposed to being in one large warehouse where there's no separation. So if there were to be an event and a container were to go into thermal runaway and have a fire, the emergency response would just let that burn out and protect the adjacent facilities.
That's it. There's no you can't drop something on it. It's just burnout.
Yep, it's burnout. There's no retardant, water, or anything else. It's really a design parameter of the testings to a ton of protections to make sure it doesn't catch in thermal runaway. And so there are what's called a battery management system. It's a monitoring system that if anything were to be observed, say moisture in the container for whatever reason, it would disconnect that from the grid to get rid of its latent energy so that it wouldn't go into thermal runaway, because the properties are there needs to be energy in the cells in order to propagate this thermal runaway event. And so all those safeguards that are the layered system at the cell level, module, and all the way to the container are meant to avoid that situation. But should one occur, it does just need to be burnt out.
You previously mentioned in the record, it states that this was previously a larger proposal for 300 megawatts. Am I getting those? I'm not.
Yep.
Okay. Two-parter. How does that reduction affect your ability to store renewable energy? And how come you just didn't build it to the west of the side of the property?
Okay, great. So yeah, we originally were planning to permit 300 megawatts, but we only had the way this competitive solicitation goes, it's a very prescriptive request of evaluate the project that the market provides. And the market had provided at that time actually only 150 megawatts of the 300 megawatt. So we wanted to permit it for potential future expansion. But given some of the feedback we had, we realized that we weren't going to be able to fit 300 megawatts in order to ultimately support some of the mitigation measures like pushing the batteries further north. And so we made a determination to size it at 200, which is where we felt we would get the most benefit as far as the system needs that we have, but also be in position to site the smallest facility on our property possible. So that's why we went with 200. We have made some other decisions for 2026, which is when this needs to come online to meet our needs, to support that lack of additional facilities that we're building at Boise Bench. So are making some firm market purchases, and we're bringing some other batteries on at different locations in the same year so that we can make sure that that load and resource balance match each other. And the reason we didn't go to the west was mostly because it doesn't look like it from an aerial view, but there's quite a slope there. And so the constructability of that western property just wasn't as conducive as the parcel that was flat.
Madam Mayor. All right, pull me back if I can't. But as you mentioned on the record, previously you talked about site selection, getting power near where it's being used. Looking at that usage here in the Treasure Valley Metro, and you just noted other sites that you're looking at, is the expectation that there would be similar facilities like this in other neighborhoods or communities throughout the metro?
Not as much. Boise Bench property specifically was not metro when it was built. It was, pretty far out, and that's why that's such an expansive property. Our other substations in the greater metro area are much more contained to a typical substation footprint of less than 5 acres. So I can't say that it's not something we would evaluate, but I don't see it happening because we just don't have that situation that exists at other facilities.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So now we've heard from the applicant and the appellant. We're going to take a 10-minute break. Still don't see the neighborhood association here. Is Eric online? Okay. And then when we come back, we'll start with public testimony. So if you didn't sign up and you plan to testify while we're taking a break, why don't you come on up and sign up? That way I can go through the list. All right, welcome back, everybody.
Right.
I'm now going to start through this list. So the first 2 people on the list were the applicants. So you signed in, thank you, but I'm not going to call you again. The next person on the list is Rebecca Green. And then I think it's Lisa Winter and then Elizabeth Lisberg. Come on up. And while Rebecca's speaking, if Lisa and Elizabeth would start to make their way up here, that'd be great. And then Jason Lyons. Some folks are names I'm calling are here, correct? Because I'm not sure if everybody accidentally signed up on this sheet or not. Great. Okay, you're ready. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. Madam Mayor, council members.
Rebecca, will you pull the mic down some?
Sure. I'd like to say that lithium battery fires are different from brush fires in that they release hydrogen fluoride, causing severe burns to the skin, eyes.
Rebecca, sorry. It was pointed out to me that when we're moving sideways, folks can't hear.
Sorry.
So
Did you
maybe
hear
if
me?
you put it, I don't know if higher or lower
Okay.
helps you read. I'm sorry.
Okay. So I'm saying that lithium battery fires differ from brush fires in that they release hydrogen fluoride, causing severe burns to the skin, the eyes, the respiratory system, and the chemical is highly corrosive to all building materials, including metal, concrete, and glass, among others. Fallout of chemical fires forever pollute the environment, never break down. They result in continuous release, causing environmental contamination and chronic illness. These fires cannot be extinguished with water and are allowed to burn themselves out, releasing harmful chemicals into the air potentially for days. The location of the site is surrounded by thousands of homes, businesses, the Boise River, and water canals distributing water throughout Idaho, all within the area of impact from chemical cloud and drift. There's no room for error in management over the facility life, yet human error happens, as do acts of God. Projects always involve evaluation of failure scenarios. Idaho Power has taken a pre-event defensive move, seeking passage of a state government bill March 2025, granting them immunity, passed the Senate March 24th. I believe it was the 24th. It is possible that insurance premiums for property, medical liability, and personal medical care could increase due to this risk. I ask this project be delayed for more consideration before quality of life for our community is forever changed.
Thank you. Right, Lisa? Then Elizabeth Lisberg and Jason Lyons. Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Lisa Winter. I live in Surprise Valley with my husband who has ALS. Our home is approximately 2 miles from the proposed battery plant. Like many residents here tonight, I am concerned about the location of the plant and the safety of adjoining and nearby neighborhoods and the Boise community at large. According to Idaho Power, it acquired the Amity Road property where the plant is proposed to be located in the 1950s, some 70 years ago, long before the property was surrounded by residential neighborhoods as it is now. These neighborhoods are full of families that include children of all ages, including the very young, the very old, and those with compromised health and disabilities like my husband. In mid-January, okay, I'm going to skip. At an informal community meeting held March 19th at the Bound Crossing Library concerning the proposed plant, Idaho Power representatives confirmed that there is no public emergency notification and/or evacuation plan included in its proposal before you tonight. This is both concerning and puzzling, given the fact that Idaho Power very effectively notifies city residents of power outages on our phones. In the event of a fire occurring at night at the battery plant, without public notification, a highly toxic plume of smoke containing heavy metals would be released and dissipated over sleeping families. Whether by sirens or electronic notification such as Amber Alerts, the public needs and deserves immediate notification and an evacuation plan. Every family deserves that. I deserve an opportunity to evacuate my husband, who at any time may soon be in a full power wheelchair and require mechanical breathing assistance. At the March 19th meeting, I also learned that the following day, Idaho Senate Bill number 1124 was to be introduced. If passed and signed by the governor, this bill provides immunity to Idaho Power from liability should a battery plant fire occur. This does not pass the smell test. I urge the council not to vote on the proposed plan tonight and instead to take the time to consider what you have heard tonight from many concerned citizens, including me. Idaho Power's proposed plan is currently incomplete due to its omission of any public notification and evacuation plan. This omission creates a danger not only to the immediate surrounding neighborhoods, but to the entire city. In essence, Idaho Power is asking for both the city's and the public's trust, despite the fact that it has no plan to protect us beyond the plant's literal physical boundary, while actively pursuing legislation to avoid future liability and accountability. I respectfully ask that you take the time to carefully consider the risk that Idaho Power is asking the public and the city to take and weigh that against the plan before you. I will end with the question I posed to Idaho Power at the library meeting. Would you live with your children next to this battery plant? Thank you for your time.
Madam Mayor, question.
Thank you. Yes, would you mind taking a question?
That's fine.
Yeah, great testimony, everyone so far. I'm sure the rest will be good as well. I think I hear you advocating for two things. One is advocating against this proposal, this location, and two, being that if it is approved, that there's insurance that there's going to be a immediate notification mechanism as well as an evacuation plan notification system for the residents in the area. Am I getting that right? Sure.
That's mostly correct. I understand the need for the battery storage. I don't object to that. I object to the location. It's a battery plant in the center of a community full of people.
Okay.
That's my objection.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I do have one. Can I ask you a question? I can't.
Sorry. At the end, feel free to pull us aside and ask a question once this is all done, but yeah. Welcome.
Hi, Madam Mayor and council members. Before I read what I wrote, I actually wanted to respond to your question, Councilmember Steed, about is it the battery specifically? Yes. I bought my house with a substation there. And the poles that are there now that you can see through and still have our magnificent view is fine. They have since built a materials building that doesn't have a wall that blocks what they built. But also there's this nice little junkyard going on too. I'll take all of that over batteries. So it's the batteries that are the concern for all the reasons you're hearing tonight. And Councilmember Nash, I would encourage a follow-up question to the burning of those batteries. How long will they burn? They can't answer that yet. It feels a little premature to be doing this when we don't have those kinds of answers. So thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I am not here to dispute the need for a battery plant. Instead, I question whether sufficient investigation, research, and testing have been done to confirm this is the best location or simply the quickest and most affordable solution. The serious fire risk, toxic gas emissions, and noise pollution from this project cannot be ignored. Lithium-ion battery fires are notoriously difficult to contain, produce toxic fumes like hydrogen fluoride, and cannot be extinguished with water. When we met with Idaho Power, they confirmed that testing to determine how long the batteries would burn remains incomplete. Furthermore, we learned that local hospitals have not even been consulted to ensure they are prepared for a battery fire emergency. These are not minor oversights. They are critical safety concerns and demand resolution before approval. They even said tonight they will develop a plan. Shouldn't that plan be in place before this is done? Boise City Code requires that a conditional use permit must not result in material detriment to public welfare or harm to surrounding property values. This property directly conflicts with that requirement, this project. Specifically, the code mandates that substations be effectively screened from public view. Idaho Power's proposed textured walls and landscaping fail to mitigate the visual impact for residents with elevated views. Selective enforcement of these requirements is deeply concerning. Idaho Power claims that this is the only viable location, but if that's true, what happens next? As our city grows, so will the demand for additional battery plants. Idaho Power owns significant acreage at this substation, and without alternative options, more plants will inevitably follow. And there you have it.
I was going to offer you a final sentence if you wanted it.
I would ask that you all do whatever you can to at least pause this or prevent it for now until further investigation.
Thank you. All right. Jason Lyons. Oh, sorry, I didn't see it coming up. So after Jason, we've got O'Mary already testified, David Griffiths. Great. And then Don Kemper. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. My name is Jason Lyons. I live about a mile and a half down the road from where the battery plant is proposed. I only had 2 points to make, and one of them, Eric from Idaho Power kind of stole my thunder in that on one of the fire safety slides, it pointed out, and I think it's a little bit deceptive in what it says. The line was that the batteries have fire suppression and monitoring. Well, I believe they do have the monitoring, but fire suppression, in my mind, means that if a fire starts, you can put it out. But what we found out at the Bound Crossing Library meeting was that there is no way to put out a fire if it starts. If a battery goes into thermal runaway, the proposed plan is to just let it go. And in the slide that showed how these containers are built up, they start with cells. Multiple cells are put together into a module, and then the modules are accumulated and eventually gets into the containers themselves. And there are hundreds of containers, or more than 100 containers, I believe, on this site. So we're talking, and I don't know the number, Idaho Power could correct me on this, but I'm going to guess there's probably over 100,000 of these small lithium ion cells, battery cells, within the total facility. So if you think about probabilities, we know that lithium ion batteries will spontaneously run away. We have thermal runaways in some of these electric bikes that are in the city, and they tend to just spontaneously start to overheat, and then they burn down a garage or whatever. So with this number of batteries within each container and the number of containers on the facility itself, it's not really a question of if a battery fire will happen. It's a question of when. It may not happen the first year, it may not happen within 5 years. But I'd say probability wise, you're looking at least one fire, at least within 10 years. And the response to that is going to be that you let that fire burn. And so one container burns, and like it's been brought out, the containers will burn, the containers will stop the spread of fire to other containers, but the container itself where the fire starts will burn, and it will generate a plume of smoke and hazardous material. And for the council's consideration, you might think about or research a little bit about what happened down in California at the Moss facility in Monterey. They've got hazardous material problems for a long ways out from the facility itself. So just consideration to think about. Battery fire will happen eventually because there's just too many batteries there, and probabilities say it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when.
Thank you. Your time went up. I let you have a long sentence after, but
Sorry.
Thanks so much. All right. David Griffiths, and then Don Kemper, Jerry Beto, and Lori Loud are on the list.
Good evening. I agree with everything that they've said this evening. I've done a fair amount of reading on it myself, and I'm absolutely shocked that Idaho Power still wants to go ahead and proceed with this, given its location. Again, I'm not against it in any way. I'm all for it. I'm just for it being done in the desert. I think one of my bigger concerns, actually more than fire, is the toxic fumes that the lady mentioned previously. That's a huge issue. And if it happens at night, it's going to be there's no escaping. I don't want a plan. I want the plan to be build this out in the desert where it can't injure people, hurt people. One of the things that the gentleman mentioned, it was really about features, advantages, benefits for Idaho Power. And I respect the fact that they need to sell it, but there's no benefit for the people that are living in the Moxie Ridge or the Surprise Valley area. There's nothing good about this happening there. One of my biggest concerns actually was something that was brought up a little bit earlier, and it's the noise component of it. There's been studies done as recently as this year down in Phoenix with regards to a similar type of storage containers. And within 1 meter, the decibels are between 70 and 93. With an extensive amount of reconstruction work done on it at, I believe it was like 70 feet away, they got it down to 45 or so decibels. As I understand it, the code for residents, I think, in residential areas is about 45. Well, noise isn't just for this one particular thing. Noise is cumulative, and it's going to be the traffic from the generators with the power plant, power grid right behind it. It's going to be traffic from the noise around. And I think that the people in the area, and there's been lots of studies done on noise and how it can impact people's memory and certainly their satisfaction with where they're living. Real quick, the home value thing I think is really important. I live up on the ridge area, and I think the noise is going to be coming above that 11-foot wall. The study that was done down in Phoenix or California area, there was a 20-foot wall. You can't put a 20-foot wall up there. I don't think that's going to be prudent. This is not a Moxie Ridge problem or a Surprise Valley. This is a Boise issue. And with the toxic fumes, the possibility of explosion, and all the other things that go along with this, they need to build it out. Now, the gentleman mentioned earlier a little bit about transmission loss. Yeah, I read about that too, just a little bit. I'm not an expert, but it's like 1 to 3%. It's not a lot. These people move electricity, upping and lowering the power over thousands of miles in grid in and out of state. They're experts at this. They should be able to go ahead and figure it out. Those other locations that they're going to be building are going to be out in the desert, I'm pretty sure, I would guess. Also, they're going to be, Idaho Power in their report, their annual report last year, said they're going to put in 1,400 milliwatts, whatever they are, by, I think it's year 5. They're spending $5 billion over the next $4 billion over the next 5 years on infrastructure. This can't be that big of an expense for them to move it away from out of harm's way. Thank you.
Thanks, David. All right, Don, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the commission. Don Kemper. I'm here representing the members of Citizens Climate Lobby, and we're in support of this applicant. Not always, but tonight we are. And I understand the concern that the neighbors have about fire like the one at Moss Landing in California, which was tremendous and terrible and has bad consequences. And I studied it very carefully. And I don't think that's the case we're looking at here. At the same time, I want to applaud Idaho Power for its projection to get rid of their use of coal by 2030. In 2022, their coal plant in Wyoming put out more emissions than all the cars and trucks in Idaho. So if we're serious about climate solutions, we have to find ways to move to renewable resources and to get them close to Boise. The batteries are an essential part of that, and I think it's an essential part of your own goals to have a green energy for Boise in the future. Climate change is our biggest risk. The hottest 10 years in the history of recorded history have been in the last 10 years. And last year, we already got to the bottom of the goal for the Paris climate solution, the Paris Climate Conference, which set goals for the year 2100. We're 75 years away. We've already hit the bottom end of their goal ridge. Tough. Okay. Storms, droughts, heat waves, wildfires, floods are already worse than scientists thought they would be by now. And then I want to say the new design of the battery installations have reduced the risk of fire, they say, by 97%. The Moss Landing fire was indoors in an old warehouse. They had put all the batteries together. That's not the case here. The new safety designs do have suppression at the beginning hints of fire, not at the full runaway. So they can do that. I had a 20-minute conversation with the fire marshal before I testified before the Planning and Zoning Commission. He assured me that he had no more concern about this project than any other project that's come before his review. Now he's here tonight. He may be able to tell you about that. With such protections in place, the residents should sleep better knowing not only that their neighborhood is safe, but that they're contributing to a global climate solution. So thank you.
Madam Mayor, I had a question for you. I was going to say, one, thanks for coming in. Thanks for the work that your team does. And then I was going to tell you that you can't just come up here and say that it's different without explaining how it's different. But then at the end, you explained how it was different. So you took away my question. So thank you for telling us how those fire was different, than explaining some of those differences that were there as well. Thanks for coming down.
You bet.
All right, Jerry Beto.
I don't have any notes, and I just got a few short things to say. First of all, Mary used the word several times that this is up and coming technology. That gives a connotation that it's sort of the latest, best technology. Actually, it's evolving technology, and so far, globally, as well as in the United States, the world has not got ahead of this evolving technology. There's continuous fires. The previous testimony said that Moss Landing is different, but you could also say that Moss Landing is probably the most regulated battery farm in the world. Why? Because it's in California. We all know that they regulate. So, and there's fires in New York. There's fires in Europe. Lithium battery fires have been going on for 25 years. There are 2 airplanes that I know that came down from lithium battery fires. They've probably gotten a little better at it. I haven't seen any lithium battery fires take airplanes down lately, but there's battery farm fires more than Moss Landing, and we really collectively, globally, have not gotten ahead of the technology. There's still fire danger, and the other thing I would say that there's many issues brought up by many people, many of which are valid, but this is really about location. It's it may be needed. People might like it. They may be for it. They may be against it, but it's really about location. The risk reward for the city of Boise and the city council of Boise, to me, doesn't pencil out at all. If your upside, if everything goes fine, is just the same as it has been for the last 20 years. Not accepting the fire that did burn at that substation and actually kill somebody. By the way, that sagebrush is still there today, but it's a problem of location, pretty pure and simple. They can take this in some extra expense, which I imagine they've built into the other installations that they explained they're building, those expense calculations. That's where it belongs. It does not belong in the middle of the city. Thanks.
Thanks. Lori.
Okay, I urge you to vote no on the proposed power lithium project location. Lithium batteries are the future, but they should not be placed in residential areas until current regulations and fire codes are in place. Not we're going to work with the fire department. In their plan, it's to make a plan. The proposal should have the plan. The code should be current in order to build something. Idaho Power caused the fire that burned down the houses where I live 15 years ago. They're the first street of houses. The risk is very high that they will repeat history. They have tried to put in place the latest evolving technology, but technology has not caught up with these fires. As the gentleman said before, they're burning all over the US, all over the world. To prevent a significant fire, but so did in Missouri, the lithium battery plant. And in November of 24, they had a fire that caused explosions and the whole plant exploded. They had the highest technology in the world, not in the US, in the world in place. Idaho Power is putting in the most current technology, but it is behind. They can't guarantee there won't be a fire, yet they still propose a bill so they will have immunity. The containers and the 11-foot wall do not guarantee a fire from spreading. Brush will remain outside that wall. So a small amount of fire, the wind can lead the natural occurrences taking control. The fire chief stated, Mother Nature will win. We will not be able to put out all those houses. We will evacuate people, but we will not be able to, they'll all burn just like they did before. Please, I asked, protect the citizens of Boise. vote no until you have more information on where the best location would be for the citizens of Boise for this lithium plant. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to testify? All right. Before we go into rebuttals, questions for staff?
Madam
Yeah.
Mayor, I do have people online that would like to testify.
Oh, thanks for letting me know. Will you
Um,
just call them through?
Madam Mayor, this is Chandra Dana.
Uh, Hi, members. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I live in Moxie Ridge, and I hear all the, neighbors what are they already, discussed about this issue. So to me, a simple thing is risk versus reward is not worthwhile for this project. That's what the conclusion from all this, what I hear today. And, considering the mother nature and what happened around Boise with the fire accidents, is very likely that there could be an accident and there will be a huge impact on the livelihood of the entire Boise people. So I request the team to think about this before approve this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Chandra.
Yeah.
And up next?
Madam Mayor, this is Suzanne Noor.
Suzanne, welcome.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for letting me speak, and thank you for looking at the issues. I am very concerned about this project because of the potential for soil contamination and groundwater contamination. And those particular issues were basically skated past by Idaho Power in both the city planning and zoning meeting and in the town hall on the 19th. At that time, they did not have their emergency response plan written. They did not have a hazardous mitigation analysis, and they did not have specific test results that they were expecting to complete, even by tonight. I'm assuming that they have not taken a look at the potential for environmental contamination from the proposed battery energy storage system that is on the table. The chemicals that could be released, such as cobalt or nickel or manganese, aluminum, if they're using nanomaterials in any of their part construction, all of that can move fairly quickly through the soil particles and contaminate the groundwater beneath. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of wells within the path of the groundwater flow that would flow southwest and west until it got past the New York Canal, at which point it starts flowing northwest, which would affect a great many number of wells over any given amount of time if there were a chemical release. I would ask that the city council take a look at these issues before approving the CUP. It seems to me like those plans need to be in place before they move forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne. I think we have one more online. Oh, two maybe.
Madam Mayor, this is Sarah Holland.
Sarah, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Madam Mayor and City Council members, my name is Sarah Holland. I live in the Covey subdivision, which is just east of the proposed project. My concerns regarding the proposed battery farm, living near the residence, is I'm worried about the potential impact of this facility on our residential area and surrounding schools. In November of 2024, there was a fire at an Escondido, California lithium battery storage facility, and it required 3 days of evacuations and school closures for residents within 3 miles. The concern was that the people in the area could be affected due to potential poisonous vapors, such as hydrogen fluoride and hydrogen cyanide. I'm not opposed to battery energy storage, but I don't believe that this one in particular is located within a reasonable location. I urge the City Council to prioritize the safety and well-being of the residents in this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Madam Mayor, this is Katie Fight.
Hi, Katie. Welcome.
Hello, Katie Fight, 1006 North 5th, Boise, Idaho. I urge you to uphold the appeal, and Idaho Power needs to really consider the health and well-being of the citizens of Boise. It's the height of arrogance and hubris to push a project like this through at the same time as you're trying to exempt yourself from liability, as well as when you claim to, care about the people of Idaho and all those kinds of things we hear in media. Have to remember that Idaho Power, when the Hells Canyon dams were built, they promised there'd be salmon passage above those dams. That never happened. Their engineers never managed to achieve that. They wiped out the salmon runs. The fire in the foothills, the Valley Fire this year that caused house evacuations, etc. That was an Idaho Power pole, or something happened with an Idaho Power structure out there. These lithium battery plants, there's nothing in the code that covers anything with this level of danger in placing it in what's called a light industrial zone. I mean, I learned a lot by listening to the neighbors that had researched the hydrogen sulfide gas and other toxic, dangerous substances that a fire here could result in. So I urge you to uphold the appeal. This doesn't belong here. If it's for Micron primarily, I don't know if it is, but I have a suspicion that's a lot of it, the new Micron plant. Then put it by them out on the other side of the Micron facility. Do not put it right by people's homes.
Thanks, Katie.
Madam Mayor, we have two more. This is Mark Guston.
Mark? Mark, you there? Can we go to the next one while he's trying to figure it out?
Madam Mayor, the other person is Kathleen O'Connell Sundaram.
Wonderful. Welcome, Kathleen.
Hi, thanks for taking my comment. First of all, I do want to say that David Moser was very helpful, and so this is not against him personally. But point number one, I know that you're between a rock and a hard spot over this legal thing. However, it was clear when I came to this process, I came just in time to say something for the planning meeting. I had been in Santa Cruz, near Santa Cruz. My daughter lives in Scotts Valley, just had a baby, and I was there when the Moss Landing alert went out. She was 20 miles as the bird flies. It is in a bay, and so they were warned to get ready. So the thing was with the planning system, the planning decision, I think, is flawed in that they said that they were using existing code, but the code really didn't address this kind of a situation specifically. To me, they should have probably paused that and come to the city council and said, we have this problem. After all, they're supposed to be there to be your aides. Now it seems ass backwards, excuse the expression, because it seems like they got more power than you at this point, and that's not right. I am concerned about the distance. In California, they're considering a law now. It's been introduced that it has to be located. There has to be a 3,200 foot buffer at least for any battery project of this size. So I am worried. You have inversion in Boise. This happens on a bad day in the wrong way. The wind blows the wrong direction. You're impacting a wider area, and I feel that it hasn't really been addressed. I think all the cards have been in the pocket of Idaho Power, and we're getting kind of squeezed because of the legal situation, but I think there could be an exception here because it is novel. It was not anticipated in 2018, and we're now in 2025. So I would urge you to pull this off, reconsider it, address some of these concerns about emergencies, safety, and security. And please consider pulling this off the table and maybe coming together with all parties and talk about this. This is novel. The fire marshal was not there for the planning commission meeting, so questions were not asked. Just like, well, no, I'm comfortable with it, but you know what? I don't feel that we have the information to be comfortable with it. So I would urge you to reconsider this, pull this off and take a look at this before you decide. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathleen.
Madam Mayor, we can try Mark Guston again.
All right, Mark, we'll try one more time. We're not hearing you. Anybody else?
We do have one more now. There's Madam Mayor, this is Dan Matchett.
All right, Dan.
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Thank you very much for letting us speak tonight. And thanks to Moxie Ridge, Mary, for putting the appeal together. We appreciate it. My name's Dan Matchett. I'm with my wife, Keegan Matchett, 2208 East Mendota Drive. So basically right on the border. And once Idaho Power basically told us of their goals and expectations for the program, my wife and I had immediate concerns. But I think the community did a really nice job explaining kind of where we're coming from as well. So it's really just to second what our fellow neighbors and fellow Boise comrades said tonight, and that we support them, and that we ask you to say no to this project. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. And we'll try one last time, and then Is he there? What's his name again?
Madam Mayor, this is Mark Guston.
So Mark, I'm giving you one more chance. All right. Anybody else? Okay. Just want to confirm. Great. We will take questions. What time is it? 8:15. We'll take questions from council for staff before we take a break, and then head into closing arguments.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
some questions for staff or planning staff. So at the planning and zoning meeting, planning and zoning approved. They didn't add any additional conditions, I don't think. They approved conditions that the planning team had already presented. Is that correct?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, that is correct. They was approved as per the staff report and the conditions and terms therein.
And it looks like there's probably about 7 additional conditions that had to do with sewer, that had to do with working with the highway district, some of the area around the batteries being gravel, 10-foot landscape buffer, class 2 trees, sidewalks. I don't see any conditions that are related to any sort of safety plan, any sort of evacuation plan, notification plan. Was that discussed during the planning and zoning meeting or with staff?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, there wasn't any discussion about like evacuation plan per se, or nothing that the commission discussed at the hearing or during their deliberation, so it wasn't added. The fire, I believe in the fire department's letter, that was all those recommendations were included as a condition of approval. So, and Mike's here, he could speak to that. So whether they would require like an actual safety plan and such, but I think it was already being said, or the applicant was already suggesting it or saying they were going to do it. So it wasn't necessarily added as a condition per se, specifically.
Thank you. Madam Mayor, I guess I will have some questions for the fire marshal. I know that he wasn't here at the last meeting. Makes me feel a little bit weird with the Supreme Court ruling, but I also think that the fire department wrote a letter. The letter was a part of the record, and the fire department had conversations with staff and Idaho Power.
Yes.
Yep.
And it's for those reasons and in addition to the fact that his statements have been included in the record by various people tonight, he is here to answer any questions.
So if, I guess I would leave it to council if there was more questions for our planning staff before the fire marshal comes up.
Does anybody else want to ask David questions?
Madam Mayor.
Yep.
David, I'm thinking this is a question for you. So if you feel it's a fire marshal question, kick it over. But I imagine that when we have a project like this and fire department shows up to let it burn, that their job is trying to prevent that fire from catching other things on fire that they might be able to put out. So I'm wondering why we'd be requiring trees that I would consider flammable in our zoning code at a site that might pose a fire risk. Can you walk me through that? I know it seems like the sound buffer is what we're something we're trying to mitigate, but I'm concerned about putting more flammable materials or requiring them no less at a site where there's a fire risk.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, the applicant was actually had in their project or their application had suggested like 4 different types of landscape buffers around it. The one that was generally selected or referenced in the project report did have trees as part of it, although this will have to go through design review, and they can select other landscaping buffers that do not have trees around the perimeter if that is something that it's a concern. Our code does require, though, along the street frontage to plant street trees, class 1, although that is 30 feet separated from the perimeter wall, and then the facilities the batteries are even beyond that. So I think from staff perspective, the street trees were of substantial distance that wasn't going to be a fire hazard.
Madam Mayor, just to clarify there, you're talking about street trees along Amity Road, and is it Holcomb?
Madam Mayor, members of council, it would be Holcomb Street. I think no street frontage improvements were required along Amity, since that's over 1,300 feet away.
Oh, gotcha. And so there wouldn't be the trees between the battery storage facility and the neighbors' houses. We're mostly talking about on Holcomb Street.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, I think the landscape buffer that was talked about in the project report did mention trees. That is one of the possible buffers that could be used. I do think they have some other buffers that did not have trees and used ornamental grasses or other things of that nature per se. Generally, from the planning perspective, I was going to let the specifics of that landscape buffer and it's what makes it up. I was going to sort of let the design review folks work with Idaho Power on what works best.
Okay.
Madam Mayor. David, I have one question. Is this the first battery storage facility project we've seen in the city of Boise?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, I believe it's the first one we've seen in the city.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. And now I think we've got some questions for Fire Marshal Bisagno. Welcome. Come on up.
I'm ready.
Yeah,
Mike
Mayor.
Bisagno, Fire Marshal, Boise Fire Department.
So maybe just a couple questions to start us off, and I think there's probably some more down the line. So we've heard some people that have been requesting immediate notification plans, evacuation plans. I think that there's been expressed some concern that those haven't already been developed or that those aren't already underway. And I'm wondering if you can just sort of speak a little bit to the process of you working with Idaho Power or any sort of other business that has, you know, a hazmat or flammable type of material in developing those kind of plans.
Madam Mayor, council members. So when it comes to our evacuation plans, we have evacuation plans for all different types of events, and we have to have them for all across the city. So it's, I hate, this is my famous 2 words that I tell everybody in fire prevention. It depends. But what I do know is we have the ability to do mass notification. We use Code Red. We have wireless emergency alerting. It does not contact landlines. So if you're landline only, that does not work. But what we do is we also coordinate with law enforcement. We've been working with law enforcement actually more recently, more often, with developing tactics that we can utilize them and people and our resources in the area for evacuations. But it literally depends on the situation. Like for this one, if we're talking about a wildfire that could be coming out these houses, one, we will now know the behavior in the area way better since we did way back when the Oregon Trail fire hit. We would use those as those tactics for our alerting. Again, we're going to be knocking doors. We're going to be notifying people as early as we can, but the first thing we have to get is situational awareness to know where this event is heading so that we can actually make the quick plan and put it in action.
Okay, Madam Mayor, following up to that one, and excuse my lack of knowledge, and so if there's something that you need to correct when you come up and follow up with testimony, please do. So to me, when we think of a battery fire, and I know that our fire department has done quite a bit of work in providing some extra training, even to respond to battery fires with automobiles. So we know it's kind of a more complex fire than even a traditional automobile fire. I would imagine that in a facility like this, if there was something that was going wrong, that there would be some sort of early notification system that you can tell, both through detectors or sensors that they have within their units, that things are not going the way that they should and are maybe going to continue to escalate. So I would just imagine that in this type of facility in other cities and other areas, that there would be, templates in place that would help us understand what type of security measures there should be. And I'm wondering if you are aware of those or if that's part of the conversation. It seems like there's other things that other cities are doing that we could be following here to address some of the concerns of the neighbors. And I guess I just haven't heard that be talked about yet.
Madam Mayor, council members. So that would be when we discuss that. First, we need to know site specifics for this site alone. Fire Risk Alliance is going to be aiding us in helping put together those plans, and the plans are going to be. It's not a cookie cutter plan. It's the plan for Boise. It's through our operations division that we're going to be devising this plan. They're just going to be assisting us. But the first thing we need to know is the site's capabilities. It's the same as knowing a building's construction type. We build our tactics and strategies around construction types when we do structure fire. So it'd be the same thing for this site. So we have the generic response, but we need to know the site specifics. And until we know that, that's when we'll have our final set of plans, because we'll have more than one, because multiple types of emergencies that can happen in any area.
Great, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm sure you're going to have some more questions from council. I guess I would just say one more comment. My expectation is that when Idaho Power comes back up to present, that can speak a little bit more to what these types of emergency response plans would look like, notification plans would look like, what other places are doing, and what the things that you plan to work on with the fire department could be. I don't think that we have the ability to add additional conditions to that. And so I'm hoping that that's something that you can speak to, that you're doing voluntarily with your upcoming testimony. Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Thank you. I have two different topic questions, but the first one is related to the response plan, which Council Member Halliburton kind of mentioned. So I'll riff off of that. Maybe if there's other council questions about that, can go after this one. But in the prior planning and zoning public hearing, Mr. Kemper testified and noted his discussion with you, and stated that you had told him that you would not let Idaho Power turn on this project until both Idaho Power and Boise Fire have jointly completed comprehensive training. Can you just verify that, and then also just confirm that that would indicate there is a comprehensive training and response plan, and would that entail emergency evacuation as well?
So, Madam Mayor, council members, Mr. Kemper summarized what we said. There was no direct quotes out of any of that. He asked me if he could directly quote me, and I told him no, since we were on a phone conversation. What that was regarding was the rules that are set in place don't allow them to get past these steps before they put this in action. It's required by the fire code, the hazard mitigation analysis, fault analysis, response plans. All these are requirements in order to put this into operation. So they have to follow all the steps in order to do it. So the fire code itself does not allow for it until they have satisfied code requirements.
Madam Mayor, I'm just going to try to summarize that. So
if I'm hearing that correctly, because I know one of the big concerns was that the application mentions that a plan is required, but that there is no plan. But so what you're saying, and what I just want to confirm, is that this will not be in operation until the fire department has agreed on an actual plan.
Madam Mayor, council members, that's correct. It states in the fire code that it has to be approved by the fire code official.
Thank you.
And just if I could add to that, in the fire code, it also allows me to ask for a third party review of all of their plans. So, and on their dime as well. And they had no issue with it. They did not feel any insult. So we are seeking a third party that will review everything they submit to us.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Oh.
Yeah, okay, Madam Mayor. Fire Marshal Pisagno, thanks for being here tonight and help us address some of the questions on this. Being this is a first of a kind project in Boise, I think it's really behooved of us to make sure that we're keeping the city safe. And with these lithium ion batteries, my understanding is, there's a mix of chemistries within them. And I want to make sure, and it sounds like, if I heard you right, that within our fire mitigation plans that have to be submitted and approved, this will be an area that'll be addressed of what kind of gases will be there, how do they off gas, the volume of that, how do we control that? Is that an accurate assessment?
Madam Mayor, council members, so that is part of the required hazard mitigation analysis that we take into account all the hazards that this could pose at this site and the mitigating measures that need to be taken in order to avoid it.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, as a follow-up, so with that, considering that these are hazardous gases, if there were a fire, would we use our hazmat teams in response to these? Would you assume?
Madam Mayor, council members, I would assume that we most likely would mobilize the hazmat team in case there was any emergency at a site of this type. Whenever we hear of any sort of lithium ion, or basically electrochemical batteries, there's the potential for hazardous materials to be released. So we would definitely include our hazmat team. They'll also be part of our response plan creation. So
great. And what is the closest hazmat team to this location?
They are stationed at both Station 17 at Cole Road, just south of Victory, and on 5 Mile Road, just south of Overland.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Mayor. Another question. So we had in the planning and zoning meeting and feedback that was on that record, a lot of concerns about groundwater that seemed to imply, the chemicals with fire operations dosing down the flames, that these chemicals would seep into the groundwater, and that was one of their concerns. We also heard on that record that water wouldn't necessarily help with these fires or be used. Can you kind of speak to that would there be concerns about a high amount of water going on around this site, or is that something that just you wouldn't foresee happening in response to a fire?
Madam Mayor, council members, without going through the education, the site-specific education with Fire Risk Alliance, and they've created plans for multiple departments around the country. I have been consulting with Nampa Fire Department. They do have a battery energy storage system installation in their district as well. They were trained by Fire Risk Alliance. They told me that they appreciated the education they got and had no problems with it. When it comes to putting water on something close to electricity, we're very hesitant to do so, and rightfully so. But without being, I guess, thoroughly educated on this site and what's the potential for it, I couldn't tell you one way or the other. So again, it depends. I'm sorry, my famous saying.
No, that's fair. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, thanks for being with us tonight. I have a clarifying question. So the way that I understand this is that these battery facilities are self-contained. So if we think beyond what sort of chemical compounds that will be in the air, can you talk about the risk of fire spreading? Because obviously you can't use water. So talk to us about what that would look like if it were to go beyond the cell that in which it's contained.
So, Madam Mayor, council members. So from what I've studied, and I've studied through a lot, because knowing that I wanted the homeowners association to be educated, and so I'm glad we had our opportunity 2 weeks ago to discuss it. But what the UL listing that each of these containers, the proposed containers get, they get that listing by going through a large scale fire test of that exact container, not just a sample, but the exact container. When you pass that test, it basically states that no fire should propagate from the one that's on fire to any of the other due to the requirements of distancing between them, the fire proof or the fire resistance ratings of the containers and all in that. That's not to say that it can't happen. So I'm not going through this and not assuming that only one's going to burn and then all is done, because we know that stuff happens, correct? So the chance of the fire getting outside the facility, what we did was for part of the mitigation was the entire floor inside the wall has to be free of vegetation. And we know that the native vegetation out there is cheatgrass, which burns fairly easily. And then part of our response plan would be we would prepare for the worst. We would prepare for fire to escape the facility, and therefore we would be protecting the exposures. Our most important piece, or the things we want to protect the most, are the exposures. It's the people. We could care less if all the batteries burn up. We don't want anybody to get hurt at all. So that would be part of our response plan, is how many people, how many resources are we going to need, where are we going to plan to stage them, and that. But we still have to figure out the site specifics with these people as far as where should we be. But yeah, I can't predict anything outside the testing. We just prepare for what the testing might not have accounted for.
Madam Mayor. Are there any like industrial type uses similar to this where maybe it might not be appropriate to use water to douse a fire, but water might be useful in preventing the spread of that fire to other properties? I mean, indulge me on this, but I think of those when they interview the one guy in the California fire who turned his sprinklers on and then he left and he's the last house standing. Are there circumstances where we might require those type of mitigation efforts, even if they aren't, that might prevent the fire from spreading, but maybe not stop a fire at a battery facility?
Madam Mayor, council members, are you saying inside the site, or are you talking about the
I think
actual?
maybe the perimeter of the facility. Is there some type of duty of care that the power company would have, any fire mitigation strategy to prevent that fire from spreading to nearby properties that might include a remedy like this?
Madam Mayor, council members, the mitigating strategies so far are the fact that we have reduced it to no vegetation allowed on that site. The concrete wall acts as basically another fire barrier. When it comes to outside the wall, then it's up to what's outside the wall on their property, and then it's also up to all of us as property owners to make sure that we keep our yards free of things that could potentially catch our house on fire. But there's many things they could probably try, but our mitigation so far was the fact that we're eradicating vegetation, which is the fuel that could kick up the embers that could, in a wind event, make its way into neighborhoods.
Madam Mayor, just as a follow-up on that, I understand that the requirements of our code related to other types of landscaping on the property might not be, it's on the same parcel, but maybe not be very close to the actual battery packs. Are there any concerns that you have about requiring more vegetation while you're simultaneously requiring less vegetation on the same parcel?
So, Madam Mayor, council members, so being that this site resides in the ignition resistant 2 zone in the city, they're restricted to to specific types of vegetation they can plant.
Anything further? The marshal, fire marshal? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
We will now hear from the rebuttal from the applicant. And then the appellant gets the last word.
Thanks again, Madam Mayor, council members. I just have a couple quick points and really not so much in rebuttal as everything that I would rebut is already on the record.
It's just, that's what we call it.
Yep, fair enough.
Closing arguments, how about?
But I will make a few points in response to some of your questions specifically. So I think the question was, what are some of the major components of the emergency response plan? Paraphrasing. So we do have a draft emergency response plan, and it has very generalized terms within it. Those terms are protection of the facility in an emergency situations. And when I say facility, what I really mean is it defines the characteristics of what first responders would do in a reactionary situation, which is to stay out of the facility and maintain public safety. And so that plan, the reason it's not fully developed is all the reasons that the fire marshal just suggested, which is it depends on the design, it depends on access around the facility, it depends on vegetation outside the facility. So I don't want it to be misconstrued that we haven't thought about the emergency response plan or that it's something that is not fairly standard. But the idea is making sure that we have the permit to make sure we understand the full design and the final configuration so that we can implement a very responsive emergency response plan that is specific to the facility and the location. But it generally, again, will reference how to respond, making sure that we have appropriate communication protocols. And so the emergency response plan very much could have obligations for us to notify the fire department through our monitoring system. I think you had also asked, we have a 24/7 monitoring system of, what, as I mentioned, the battery management system that's connected into our 24/7 operation in our dispatch center. That can alarm the fire department. We don't want to send conflicting messages either. And so the emergency response plan would define, should we send response to customers or should we only notify you, fire department, who then wants to handle the situation from a public safety perspective? So hopefully that gives a little bit of context.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, and if I could just clarify the question. Yes, it did. And I think that's great. And we certainly want to make sure that we're looking out for the safety of our firefighters here. And I believe that you will be working with them to do that and doing that sort of training. What I'm also hearing from the community is that they want to make sure that if they're sleeping at night and something weird starts happening in one of the battery containers, that something's waking them up and saying, it's time to move out so you're not going to breathe in potential smoke that's coming out. Whether the smoke comes out or not, potential smoke that comes out that says, now's a good time for you to get away from where the chemicals could be. I think that's what I'm not hearing so far. I'm hearing lots of good work, collaboration with our fire department, lots of confidence from them that they can work with you and commitment to do that. I'm wanting to hear a little bit more about our neighbors.
Yep, fair enough, Madam Mayor and Councilmember Halliburton. So a few points there that I think are important. One is, in order to develop an emergency response plan, you heard the term hazard mitigation analysis. The hazard mitigation analysis, the first step is to look at all the chemistry that exists and what the potential pollutants are, or any material that would go into the air given a catastrophic situation. And what I can tell you is that the testing that has been done on this specific units is very different than other facilities across the nation where some of this research may have been pointed to. There are no, in fact, we have done our own air monitoring of situations in our research, and part of the reason we hire companies like Fire Risk Alliance is to do that exact analysis so that we understand what those hazards are. And so the first point is that we don't believe there are hazards that will go into the air, even given a fire. And second is that we can certainly provide direct response. My concern is that that could be in conflict with the way the fire department wants to manage tactical response. And so again, we would definitely notify the fire department if we have alarms, and that would be based on what sorts of alarms they want to know. Do they just want to know if there's moisture in the area, or do they want to know that it's escalated to a position where they may have to take action? And we can certainly work into any communication strategy or notification into that plan. So I don't want to dismiss your concern, but I also want to be very cautious about, we as the utility don't want to send a message where we have access to customers to send them outage messages and things. If it's in conflict with the emergency response plan that the fire department would like to enact in a given situation.
Madam Mayor, just responding there. So I guess I'm hearing two things. One, that I appreciate that we don't want to create chaos when there doesn't need to be chaos. We want to make sure that that communication is coordinated. Two, I think that you're saying that the units that you're using, the containers that they're in, if there was to be a fire, should be contained within the container and wouldn't be releasing smoke or vapors into this neighborhood.
It can release smoke, absolutely, but the monitoring that we've done in an event that has happened in Idaho showed no levels of any harmful emissions from that plume. And that burned for a couple days in a situation where it was a bit different design, where they were small containers that had they had a pass through basically. These containers are different. These are expected to burn anywhere from 6 to 24 hours for one individual container. But again, the harmful substance through the smoke, and while it may look terrifying, frankly, our monitoring and the research we've done, and certainly what we'll have Fire Risk Alliance do and validate, is that there actually aren't any levels that would be harmful to human health.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Mayor. Hi, thanks. Thanks for being with us today. A couple of questions, and it really centers on the risk when it comes to if something goes wrong. So first of all, any sort of clean energy has some sort of impact. We're human, that happens. Just looking at what happened in California is very gnarly. I mean, it's not good. I am curious if you can talk to us about the difference between what Idaho Power wants to do and what the plant in California was built to do, and just help us get some sense of the differences there.
Yeah. Thanks again, Madam Mayor and council members. I'm going to provide the response that I have some knowledge about, but I will acknowledge that we have Fire Risk Alliance here with us tonight. If there are some specific questions, he'd be more than happy to come up and answer some of those details that he can certainly respond to with his background as both a firefighter and his company as an engineering firm.
Madam Mayor. Oh, sorry.
Procedural question.
No, I'll let you finish. But I before Fire and Risk Alliance, if they do get up, I'd like to ask a question about that.
I was just wondering if that was allowed and if they can. So however you want to stage that. Okay.
Madam Mayor, before we do that, could I just ask some questions about that? Help me understand what Fire and Risk Alliance is. And also, I need to better understand the regulatory function that's going on here, because it feels like we're deferring to a third party that might have some expertise in this. Does anybody inspect these battery packs? Is anybody at the state or federal level responsible for oversight here, or is this self-reporting? You work with fire marshals to engage a third party. Is that the model that we're looking at here?
Yeah, I believe it is. I mean, there isn't a general jurisdiction outside of the codes and making sure that we're compliant. And of course, we go through inspections and work with the fire marshal. We'll inspect when we have the products purchased and delivered, that they have met the certifications that are mandatory for stationary utility batteries.
And Madam Mayor, who is Fire and Risk Alliance? Who pays them? Where do they get their expertise from? Like, who is relying on them? Is that a service that the city contracts with? Are you responsible for that? Does industry help me understand who they are?
Yep, that's fair. And I'm sure Brian can provide a little bit more overview as to what his company does. But in general, they are an industry expert. So we have hired them because we are not industry experts. We're purchasing a product. And so we want some support from industry experts, and their company is made up of firefighters, fire engineers who then work in the industry and ensure that codes are established such that the industry then has a set of criteria that they need to meet when procuring products like this. And so we rely on them. Certainly, as the fire marshal said, there are companies like FRA or others that can provide third-party independent review to make sure there is code compliance. But they are a company that we've hired because we can't, without their expertise, know that we're meeting all those codes. And so we rely on companies like this as subject matter experts to ensure that we're compliant with all the applicable codes.
Madam Mayor, just one last notice to is it Fire and Risk Alliance. I want to understand what incentives you have as an organization, this third party, to give us the best information possible. I mean, you were hired by industry, so I take it with a little bit, but help me understand the reputational risk or whatever you might have on the line for not giving me the best possible information to make decisions as a policymaker. So.
And then just a clarifying question as you're come on up, sir. Fire Marshal, when you referred to you can just nod or yes or no. When you referred to a third party that you intended to hire, you were not referring to this entity. You yourself, the fire department, will be hiring an independent entity for verification of the plans. Sure. Actually, then come on up to the mic. Just to clarify the roles of the two third parties that are.
Madam Mayor, council members. So in the fire code, it says that the fire code official can request technical expertise from a third party at the expense of the applicant. So Idaho Power has agreed to bring in a third party review on who that we choose. So that's
and by bringing in, you mean you choose, they pay.
Yes.
And the third party works for you.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. This third party is not the third party.
Fire Risk Alliance is not our
Yes.
third party.
Okay. Come on up.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. My name is Brian Fink. I work for Fire and Risk Alliance. It's a fire protection engineering firm. They are a third-party independent contractor for power providers. I am not an engineer. I'm a retired fire chief in New York City. I now currently train firefighters how to respond to emergencies at these facilities. That's the role I play for the company. And I'm here to answer whatever questions you might have regarding either Fire Risk Alliance or fires at these facilities or the ERPs, the emergency response plans, whatever you'd like to speak about. I can try to answer your questions.
We'll go back to Councilmember Willetts.
Thank you. And thanks for your service in New York. And I like the accent. Thank you very much. So we'll hear from you a little bit more. Do you have any knowledge about what happened in Monterey and how that was different and any sort of context you could give us?
Sure. Yeah. So I don't have specific detailed information about Moss Landing other than it's an indoor facility, very different from an outdoor facility. So in the indoor facilities, they're large open areas with open racks of batteries. Modules, thousands of them. They have to sprinkler the buildings to protect the building. It does not protect the batteries. It actually spreads the fire. And that's what happened in not only Moss Landing, but several other indoor facilities. Water and electric don't go well together. So when the sprinkler systems activate, they short out more and more racks of batteries, and that's what caused the entire plant to burn down. Very different than when it's containerized and outdoors. There's a very limited amount of batteries in each one of these containers. So we're really talking apples and oranges when you're talking indoor storage, which I'm not a big proponent of, and outdoor storage, where it's very limited to what's in one container and it doesn't spread throughout the entire facility.
Thank you. So one of the things that we talked about earlier this evening is, the understanding that these facilities are self-contained and they basically burn for, sounds like 6 to 24 hours if something goes wrong. One of the concerns that we hear from the neighbors is how that could spread other places. From your experience, what would that look like? If this is a new technology, you sound like it sounds better than what's happened in other states. Talk to us about what that looks like and how to mitigate that.
So we're talking about fire spread?
Yep.
Okay, so fire spread, and if you look at the data that's out there, that's what I like to work off of, is data rather than just theorizing about what will occur. So if you look at the data, none of these fires have ever spread off site. Basically, they stick to the container that is involved, and it's a whole myriad of possibilities when a container or certain cells within a container go into thermal runaway. Some of them, and someone brought up UL 9540A. That's a testing standard. I sit on that committee, and that makes these manufacturers of these pieces of equipment, mainly the batteries, go through this testing before those batteries can be used in one of these systems. And what they do is they test at the cell level, they test at the module level, and they test at the unit level. And what they want to see is how far will it spread? So that's one of the things that the fire department should be asking about. We want to see the 9548 test results, because many of these, it only will spread to one or two other cells, and that's the event. The older technology, the nickel manganese cobalt batteries that they were using up until about 2 years ago, it's a more volatile fire, and they seem to have spread further with those type batteries rather than the lithium iron phosphate batteries. So you could have an event where it's a few cells that just off gas, and that's the event, all the way up through a fully involved container. But it's never left the site. And one of the other big pieces of information that nobody really talks
I'm going
about.
to pause you there because you use the words container and the word site. So when you say it's never left the site, do you mean the actual container or the piece of property on which the container sits?
Yeah, none of these fires have ever left the actual facility. Most have not even left the container. I think you can see a picture of a Tesla container in Australia. This was several years ago, where it burnt the roof of an adjoining container, but that's as far as it went. So none of the fires that I have researched have ever left the facility, ever. The one other piece of information, I'm sorry.
No, keep going.
The one other piece of information I think people forget to mention is there was an event in 2019 in Surprise, Arizona, where firefighters were injured. It's because they weren't trained and they weren't even aware that they were dealing with batteries. But that's the only time anyone's been injured at any one of these fires in North America. There has not been another injury since then.
And one last one. So one of the things that we deal with during the summer is wildfires. We choke on the smoke. It's horrible. It ruins us. It ruins a lot of things, a lot of summer plans. So obviously that's a concern because we all live with it in this valley. Talk to us about your experience with the smoke and the breathability of what happens once one of these things burns down.
Yeah, and I do a lot of work out in California, and you know what just happened out there, right, with the wildfires out there, and they're very concerned about it as well. So these sites, and I like the fact that they're putting a large wall around it because it helps protect the site, right? It protects the neighborhood from the site, and it protects the site from vegetation around it. So that's a good thing. So any fire produces toxic gases. I don't care what's burning, whether it be grass, trees, batteries, warehouses, Home Depots. They all produce toxic gases. What we have seen through the studies that have been done at these events is that the gases that are produced right where they come out of the container, they're at their worst. As the fumes or gases start to drift away, they become diluted. People have spoken about HF, hydrogen fluoride. That's right near the containers. Once you get away from the containers, it changes its form very rapidly. And the testing that's been done at fires around the country, there's reports out of California, reports out of New York, and they test specifically for that. The EPA have been at these events, as well as the fire department doing their own monitoring. They're not picking up hydrogen fluoride off-site at all. I think it was San Diego, and it was probably the Escondido fire, where they characterized the smoke coming off these containers the same as what you would have off a structural fire. And that's what most of the fire departments know. You're talking about evacuations and sheltering in place. That's another tactic that most fire departments are starting to move towards, is the sheltering in place. Close your doors and windows and don't be out there videoing a fire, right? Smoke that they've measured off-site is the same from a structural fire. That's basically what all of these reports have shown. Soil and water contamination has been tested for as well. And every one of these reports have come back the same. Now, Moss Landing was a very different event, and I haven't seen the final results on that, but that was thousands and thousands and thousands of modules of batteries, not a container worth of batteries. But all the soil and water samples that have been done in New York and California have not shown toxic levels in the soil or the water. And again, I like to speak from data rather than just my own personal opinion, and that's where I'm getting the data from, is these reports from actual events.
Madam Mayor, could you just speak to the why should we rely on your opinion? What risks do you incur to your reputation if you're not being candid with us? And I'm just a little uneasy about
Absolutely
the type of regulatory model we have in this country generally. So.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what, everybody's playing catch up with this, and you're absolutely correct. You know, the codes haven't kept up to the technology is really what's going on. Personally, I spent 38 years with the New York City Fire Department, 20 as a chief. I wouldn't ruin my reputation telling you something I didn't firmly believe and have data to back it up. And that's why I speak from data rather than personal opinion, right? All the things I'm telling you, it's because of reports that I've read and data that's come out of previous fires. Now, as far as my firm is concerned, it's a fire protection engineering firm, and it's not my firm. I just work for them, right? They're well known throughout the country as like a premier fire protection engineering firm. They don't just work on batteries. They work on all kinds of different fire protection engineering projects, from SpaceX rockets to batteries to protecting structures with sprinkler systems. And they do all of the analysis, plume modeling and explosion modeling and HMAs and ERPs. They write all of those plans, and they're well known throughout the country and the industry as being, you know, one of the elite agencies doing this.
Madam Mayor, Brian, thanks so much for being here tonight. So we talked about if potentially a few cells may just catch fire, and you mentioned they would off gas, but that off gassing does actually leave the container.
It does.
Did I catch that right? And a terrible gas such as HF will leave the container, but it's most concentrated at that container where it leaves. Do you have data? I'm glad to hear you're data-driven man.
Yeah.
And do we have studies that show how that dissipates out?
Yeah, I wish we had better studies, but the studies that I'm referring to are from actual events where the reports were written. And I encourage you to read the ones out of New York State as well as the ones out of California, where they had detailed information on air, water, and soil sampling.
Yeah.
We can get you that information if you'd like.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And Madam Mayor, a couple other questions. So I know we talked about the containers are going to be monitored, but are we also talking about real-time air monitoring?
Yeah, typically the fire department would do that. That's why they bring in their hazmat units. The EPA will have somebody here if there's an event, because they go to all the events. So they will be doing it in conjunction with the fire department. And what I encourage the fire department when I train them is to send your people to where the people are that you're concerned about. If smoke is drifting to the east, send your people to the east and start monitoring. If you're finding any kind of levels that you feel are concerning, then you make a determination, shelter in place or evacuate. All the fire departments that I've spoken to that have had these events, after the fact, they first started out where they were evacuating huge amount of areas. And then they started to realize, okay, this is probably not the best way to go. We're just causing more problems than we're resolving. So most of them now are sheltering in place. Close your doors and windows and don't be outside if there's an event going on.
Yeah. Great. And Brian, so do we have facilities today that are actually doing real-time air monitoring at the facilities?
Yeah, very few have that. You could request that, but it's really, I think you'd be wasting your time, their money doing that, because if the wind isn't pushing it towards one of those air monitoring devices, you're not going to get any readings. So, yeah, I think it's an event-driven function where the fire department or the EPA would come in and make sure they're on the side where the smoke is actually going to.
So just to clarify, so I'm tracking too, what you're saying is these measurements that you're talking about are taken during fire events.
That is
So
correct.
they deploy measuring equipment and that's where the data comes from.
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
Right.
Madam Mayor.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry.
thank you. Lots of questions. So we've heard from residents and about groundwater contamination and others. So if there was a full, I think it's called console inside, and that's melting and it's got to go the full 24 hours, what happens to those materials and the liquids? Anything says,
Yeah, I know what
you're
you're.
drain pan in there.
Okay, so there isn't that much liquid inside the batteries where it would be a large quantity of liquid coming out of the batteries. I think where people get concerned is if you put water on it, which we tell the fire department don't do that. It's counterproductive, right? Yeah. You don't want to do that. And if there is hydrogen fluoride being developed right near where it's venting, you can turn that into hydrofluoric acid. Yeah. Right. So we don't want to put water on the batteries for a number. One, it's useless. It doesn't put the fire out. And two, you just create a bigger problem. Yeah. But even at those events where they have used water, they haven't had that contamination in the results that they did after the fact.
I guess that my follow-up question is then, are these containers built to store those materials that are then melted? And is there processes that have been developed through to remove that, or is it a removal?
So the decommissioning that's got to be part of the plan, the decommissioning of that. Yes. And they have to bring an outside concern in. The fire department wouldn't be involved in that. They shouldn't have to do any of that, right? Fire department will never be opening one of these containers. And basically, once the batteries burn up, it's just like melted plastic inside of a metal container. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah. And two-part question, what's the life of these batteries traditionally? I know there's lots of different types of manufacturers. Yeah. And if there's a recall process, is it the power company that's probably going to be notified of that?
Yeah, well, the lifespan, they like to think it's going to be 20 years, but there's no projects out there 20 years old. So, is it going to be 20? We don't know. But they monitor their batteries. And one of the several people had mentioned the battery management system. That's how they tell the health of these batteries, right down to the cell level. If they start seeing a problem with an individual cell or a module, they'll pull it out of service. They'll take that module out before there's a problem with it. That's part of what they do. And the battery management system allows them to see pending events that may occur. Does it always work? Obviously not, because there's been fires, but it's a pretty good system to identify cells that may be running into a problem.
And is there a process for disposal of these batteries?
There is, and actually they do recycle these things, yes. And that's where the third party, typically they use a third party decommissioning vendor to do that, and they recycle the batteries.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor. You talked about battery management system, kind of relates to a question I had for you. I'm sure other areas that you've worked with and developed these batteries have, let's see, you can get the right acronym here, public safety power shutoffs, or a PSPS. What does the battery management system do in a situation like that?
So it's automatically designed to isolate the affected module down to the module level or the container level, where if it sees that there's a fault, it will isolate it so it can't spread to adjoining equipment.
So power ceases to come in and out.
Correct. It stops charging and discharging. Exactly correct.
Madam Mayor, I'm sorry if you've already spoken to this, but obviously there's a lot of residents concerned about the aquifer that's below here. Water, very valuable resource in the West. And
I'll tell you what, all their concerns are valid. I give them a lot of credit for raising these concerns. You need to get educated on what's going to be coming into your neighborhoods. And they've done a lot of research. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of good data out there. And again, I go back to the data from previous events where they have not had that issue. They've tested the water. There was an event in Long Island, New York, I live on Long Island. So they did water and soil sampling as well as air sampling during the event. And it was an indoor facility, not as big as Moss Landing, but a lot of batteries were on fire in that facility. And they did soil sampling because it's in a very nice area right near the Long Island Sound, and they were concerned about their water as well. They did not find any levels of contamination in the soil or the water when they did that.
Regardless if there's been data to support that type of contamination,
Mhm.
are you aware of any efforts either in the industry or the manufacturer to prevent some type of contamination? Like what we have, there's mitigating there's controls around spreading from battery to battery or
Yep.
off the site.
Mhm.
But as far as chemical contamination of soil or water,
I'll tell you what, every one of these battery, it's funny, when they build these containers, the batteries typically aren't the container manufacturer, right? They buy batteries, like they put these things together, kind of like they do an airplane, right? The only containers that I've seen that actually have a bit of a well built into the bottom are Tesla containers where they do that. There may be others out there as well that do that. These containers are water resistant. They don't want things getting into the containers. So they're not going to leak things out of the containers either, right? So in a sense, they all have that capability. I know Tesla's containers, they have a specific like pan in the bottom that they collect anything that may drip out of it.
but some of those would be less useful if it's up in flames.
Well, if it's up in flames, basically everything is burning off. You know, flame is actually not a bad thing to have happen in that it's consuming a lot of the things that you're more concerned with. And much of the smoke you're seeing coming off these things, it's the insulation and the plastics. Many of these batteries, the actual modules are plastic. That's where you're getting that black smoke from. When batteries go into thermal runaway, and the fire department can tell you as well, because we always tell them, look for that whitish gray smoke. That's the thermal runaway smoke. The darker smoke, that's the plastics and the insulation burning.
Madam Mayor, last question here. We talked a lot about fire risk. I haven't heard much about explosion risk. Are there gases that build up and that might pose a risk, like hydrogen?
So flammable gases in a confined space become explosive gases. So containers are required to have some sort of explosion control. And there's two possible solutions that they have to that currently. One's called deflagration vents, which are vents that lift if there's an explosion inside the container to direct that energy away from, say, anybody in the area. The other is ventilation systems, where they keep it from getting into the explosive range. That being said, if they don't work and there is an explosion, typically what happens, it blows the doors off the containers. That's why I always tell the firefighters, stay 100 feet from these things. There's no reason to be closer than that to them. If you're 100 feet away, you're not going to have an issue. There's no published data on that, the 100-foot mark. But I feel as an experienced fire chief, that's where I feel comfortable. My guys aren't going to get hurt if they're 100 feet from one of these containers and there is an explosion. And an explosion is different than what most people think. It's not like an atomic, bomb going off. It blows the doors off. That's not shrapnel or, a container launching itself off the site. It's blowing the doors off the container.
Madam Mayor, just a quick question. Would you remind me of your name again?
Brian Fink.
Right. Thanks so much for making the trip here to Boise. Were you at the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting?
I was not.
Okay. All right. Appreciate you being here tonight.
Absolutely.
I'm sure they would have had some great questions for you too. Yeah. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
All right, sir, you've got 55 seconds to wrap it up. Thank you. Thanks, Brian.
You're welcome.
And then we'll hear from Mary.
Great. Well, Madam Mayor and council members, appreciate the time again. I know this has been a long night with a lot of differing perspectives, and I just want to reiterate our appreciation for your ongoing review. Know that this is a project that we feel very compelled that is necessary to help serve our customers' needs, and we appreciate your time tonight, and that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, come on up.
I think Indiana Jones said it. It's not the years, it's the mileage. First, I'd like to thank Idaho Power and the rep from Fire and Risk Alliance for all the information they've shared here this evening. I also want to thank our fire marshal and all of the members of our community that showed up this evening to testify and just be here in support of this. Also, a big thank you to you, Madam Mayor, and the council members for letting us sit in a very long hearing tonight. Really, to me, it's amazing that we've had to do all this in the first place. Putting a large scale battery storage system, lithium ion batteries in the middle of a large community, honestly, it's deeply concerning. And it breaks my Spock brain, to be honest. The limited research I've done in my chair this evening shows that these large scale battery storage systems, BESS, they're not actually considered a substation. The current structure on site is, and adding any transformers to the site is part of the substation, but the battery systems themselves are not. Nearly everyone who testified tonight stated that they understand the need for this battery farm. And I think everybody really does. It's just the location that we disagree with. So I ask that you vote no to the project in this location. And lastly, and I'm not going to get through this without crying, and I apologize, we unfortunately don't have a real estate development attorney to help us. And I'd like to apologize to the community for my lack of information on the appeal requirements. The information that was shared with me did not include the specifics. And so I feel like I didn't quite do it justice in the way that I should have. So I apologize for that.
Mary, please don't apologize. Really, I'm just going to say this.
We see a lot of bad.
We see a lot of bad lawyers up here. Residents go through this process, and I will say that when that slide popped up, I thought, oh no, I don't like the language on that slide, because I was imagining how it made you feel. You've put together, as residents do all the time, an appeal, and you've worked with your neighbors, and you've brought it to us, and we're considering your words just as much as we're considering others, and I don't want you to beat yourself up for whatever decision is about to come. You did a hell of a job with great neighbors and worked really hard, and have a lot to show for that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think our community has done a very good job. Thank you.
Any questions for Mary? Would you be willing to take questions if there are some?
As long as they don't make me cry.
I'll try not. I just want to echo what the mayor said. First of all, foremost, you're a citizen. You're not an attorney. I don't think you have a PhD in chemistry. I mean, what's beautiful about this process is that you gathered your neighbors. You said, we're concerned. How can we band together? How can we come and participate in government and let our voice be heard? We need that. We need that even more now than we ever have. So thank you. Thanks for putting in the time, because I know it takes a ton of time and a lot of emotion. So,
thank you.
So now the question. Was there anything that you heard tonight from Idaho Power and their associated, I'll call them witnesses, that gives you a different opinion of anything that you had heard previously? Did anything change your mind?
Not for the location itself, only because it's just so close to homes. It's so close to neighborhoods. I do appreciate everything that was shared. Really, I know we did a lot of work the last couple of months, but the amount of work that's been done by everybody else is far greater. But we still can't help but think about, everybody talks about the fire prevention that's in place, with removing all vegetation and a firewall and stuff. But, embers still travel. They don't look at a wall and go, oh, I'm not going to go over that. And just like the fire marshal has stated, stuff happens and we have absolutely no idea what's going to happen. This is a massive facility and we honestly can't predict what could happen. So it didn't change my mind about the location. Thank you.
I'm going to close the hearing and ask that before deliberations, there be a motion on the table. Questions regarding
Madam Mayor.
clarifications related to motions appropriate? I just prefer that debate occur once there's something on the table. Yes.
Being that this is a first of a kind project here within the city of Boise, and I know we've heard from a lot of questions and a lot of really great experts that provided us good information tonight. However, I think there's just still a level of uncertainty with the plan. So what I'm proposing is that we defer for a couple weeks to make sure that we're getting the information our fire department needs, and they're confirming back to us they're getting the information they need to get a proper mitigation plan secured for this facility at this location.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion?
So, Madam Mayor, the reason I make this motion is not only that this is a first of a kind, is that it's a very critical facility. It's a newer technology. Not that the batteries are newer, but it is new for us within the city, and we've heard a lot of concerns here, and we've heard a lot of we're going to get some plans together, and those plans with the hazard mitigation process will be in place, but we don't have those today. And I know, and I feel that should be some information that's being brought forth to the public, that we are secure in plans, we have the information, we know what we're going to do to mitigate this if something is going to happen, and what those potentials could be. And that's why I'm asking for a deferral. We certainly need the battery storage. It's a great project, and potentially I think could be a great location, but I feel like we just need some additional information on those mitigation plans.
Madam Mayor.
I saw Halliburton, then Nash.
I just want to, I'll have some other comments. I want to make some comments about just the process of a deferral on an appeal.
Yeah.
My understanding that with a defer on an appeal, the public meeting is closed. We can't take in any additional information. So we would be prolonging the period in which we would be making our decision. So that could be 60 days from now. It could be sooner. My understanding, though, is that the public meeting is closed. We would not be taking any additional meeting from staff or additional information from staff, additional information from the public, or additional information for the applicant. So my concern would then be is that, like, it does give us some time to ponder over an important decision, which I think is good. It's always hard to hear everything and then rush and make a decision, in a short period of time. But if what we really want is to see additional work be done, then I'm not quite sure that the deferral gets us there, versus if we upheld the appeal with the intention of doing more work, or if we denied the appeal and directed staff to do some additional work. So I have just a little bit of concerns with going for the deferral rather than one of those other two. And maybe we can get some clarification if I'm understanding that correctly.
To check something procedural as well. I appreciate Councilmember Halliburton you jumping in, because I did want to say what you said about the deferral, is that it is a closed record. And if you uphold the appeal, meaning you're denying the project, you can't request more information to then approve it. They would have to come back with something substantially different after a time certain, which I think might be a year. If you deny the appeal, but want to see that these plans are in place as is required by code, you would be specifying in your decision and motion that you expected that the code, as outlined, the code process to require the different plans that would have to be developed before something could be operating. So those are the kind of the three procedural things I wanted to bring up.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, in consideration that the information that I was basing the deferral on was to get additional information, which would not be helpful since this would be a closed record. So I would withdraw the deferral. motion.
Withdraw your motion.
Withdraw the motion for deferral.
Okay.
Yes.
Do we
Madam-
need a second to withdraw? I don't think so.
You can just ask for unanimous consent.
What consent? If you consent.
I consent.
Okay. All right.
Madam Mayor.
Motion is withdrawn. You guys have seen a lot of like procedural stuff this evening. We don't typically have this many, 2 items that have us doing all these different procedural things.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
I move that the appeal of CUP 24-41 be denied and that the decision of the Planning and Zoning Commission's approval of a conditional use permit for the expansion of an electrical substation with a battery storage facility located at 2001 East Amity Road on 45.6 acres with an I1A I-O WUI-O light industrial with airport influence overlay and wildland urban interface overlay zone be upheld. Let the record reflect that the grounds that were submitted for the appeal do not demonstrate that there was an error in the decision of the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Second.
Madam,
We'll go for, does the second have a question about that motion? Okay, so then I'm going to go to the maker of the motion to start, and then I'll go to the second.
first thing, I think we need a better acronym for airport influence overlay and wildland urban interface overlay because it's not working. If you probably noticed, it's been a little hot tonight. I had a lot of concerns about this. A lot of those concerns have been resolved, not entirely, but enough to know that this satisfies the conditions of what we have in code. I also want to just acknowledge that the Veterans Park Neighborhood Association case has really limited the authority that we have, not only to what we can do, but as you've seen the mayor and I go back and forth on tonight, what we can actually discuss here. I would just reiterate that as a council member, I feel elected to, when you come with a concern, to be able to make these decisions about where a homeless shelter goes or where a battery storage facility goes. And I don't think we have that authority right now. And we're going to be doing the work to reclaiming that. I don't think that would necessarily have changed my decision tonight. There are obviously risks with this. I'm also grateful for what it will do for the community. I mean, climate change is the existential threat that we face as a society, and we obviously are not doing enough to address that. I mean, for the same reasons that I'm concerned about what climate change has done for the fires that have been caused in California. I was concerned about this facility. I appreciate the gentleman from Fire and Risk Alliance being able to present some data. I think I am assured, although I'm concerned about stories of other battery fires, that if there is not evidence that these battery fires are contributing to fires that escape the facility, that's my primary concern is protecting people that live in our city. And if there is not evidence that these fires are escaping the facilities, I feel confident that this project is appropriate for this use. Now, I just want to flag for council that when we drafted the modern zoning code and staffed it with the public, we prohibited electrical substations in residential areas. And then Idaho Power came and asked us to consider conditional use permits instead. And we need to reevaluate that because we do not have specific carve-outs in our code for battery stations. And if I were drafting a code, I would say we need to co-locate them at those substations. That's an appropriate place. But we have those substations all over the city. So we need to be thoughtful about how we deal with these types of things going forward. I just want to say I've done a lot of work with Idaho Power over the years, some good, some I have not been happy about. I just want to say I'm very uncomfortable with electrical companies lobbying in the legislature for reduced liability while coming to us and asking us to accept risk of new technology in our community. So putting on notice for that. Don't have anything I can do related to that, but it's not something that I'm very happy about, but it's not something within my authority here today. With that being said, I appreciate the neighborhood coming out with this in the future. when we reclaim our authority, I'd be happy to consider conditions that could mitigate some of the risk related to this. Right now, I do not think any conditions are within our purview to apply. That was at the Planning and Zoning Commission's discretion, and not something that we can impose at this time. So I appreciate you coming out. I hope that you work together as a neighborhood so that we can do more work with our fire department and others to make sure that there are strategies in place so that you are well prepared for catastrophic events should they occur. I know that Councilmember Stead has neighborhoods in her district that are working on those types of activities, and I would like to see more of that. So,
Madam Mayor, thank you, President Ash. That covered a lot of what I was going to say, but so I'll jump to what he mentioned at the end there. I have been working very closely with our fire department on rolling out emergency evacuation plans in specific neighborhoods, as demonstrated in the Mesa neighborhood last summer. I know that Moxie Ridge has requested that and is at the top of the list to receive that. We're waiting on some grant funding to start rolling that out, but I will stay close to it and the fire department and be sure that Moxie Ridge stays at the top of that list. And I think this is, I mean, you can see by our back and forth and all the questions to our legal rep behind us, this is complicated. Our process is complicated, and we do the best we can to continue to modify it and streamline it and make it easier for residents to digest and for developers to digest so that it's predictable. I think we asked a lot of questions tonight, which may have sort of confused things, but because we're not reviewing the application tonight, we're reviewing the Planning and Zoning Commission's decision on whether our only scope tonight is whether they made an error or not in applying the code to their decision. It has been made clear by courts that we're not allowed to look at anything else. It really is, did they make a legal error in their decision? And I am not convinced that they did. I agree with President Nash that if it was open for us to make changes, there might be a couple of other conditions to appease the neighbors that we would implement that I don't feel like we have the authority to do right now. Let me just look at my notes really quick and make sure that I'm not missing anything. Oh, I would just add that the questions that we asked tonight, although can't necessarily influence our decision on the scope that we have in front of us, they do go towards us crafting future policy. So I really appreciate all the information we received from everybody, because I think that those are the tools that we need to make decisions to continue to streamline this process and make it better for residents and for applicants. And I think that was it for me.
Madam Mayor. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you for the excellent public testimony. As far as public testimony from neighbors that's as good as it gets. And it's really hard to do this. It's really hard to come up and stand up in front of a body that's in an elevated position physically with people to your back and say what's on your mind and prepare in a very short period of time and to hustle through every single word that you possibly want to say that you can't possibly do in 3 minutes. It's hard to do, and you did a wonderful job. So thank you for preparing. I also want to thank Councilmember Corliss for the intention with that motion. And I guess what I would remind both our council, Idaho Power doesn't need a reminder for this, but for the public, is this still has to go to design review. There's still you still have a tough road to hoe to get all the way through the end of this application. So there's still more work that needs to be done, and that's good. Because it should take time to go through these different steps of the way. And my guess is what folks from Idaho Power and a lot of our developers would tell us is that it's taken a lot of steps even just to get to here. The public meetings that they've had with you, the additional public meetings that they didn't necessarily have to do required by code, but they did anyway. So like this is a big process, and it still is hard to come up here as a council member and to hear the information all at once and to make a really good decision. With the Supreme Court ruling that's been brought up, it's hard to make conditions. I'm just going to tell you what my expectation is instead of telling you what the condition is. I expect that if there's a fire in one of these containers, or what do we call it, a thermal runaway, that the fire department, Idaho Power, has worked together to notify the neighbors of what they want to do. And that could be stay inside the house, close your windows, close your doors, or it could be go somewhere else. By the time that this gets implemented, I want there to be some sort of notification system. And I know that Idaho Power can do it because you do it with different power outages and a lot of other things, and you do an excellent job with it. And I know our fire department can do it as well. My expectation is that there is something that's in place that lets our neighbors know what to do before they see a fire engine pulling up and smoke coming out of one of the units. So I'll just say that very clearly. That's all I've got for this. Thank you for hanging in here on a really, really long night. Thank you all for coming as well. Thank you for traveling in and providing that information. It was helpful. Your expertise is appreciated. I wish that at presentations at the state legislature, when we make these complicated decisions, that there was this much robust discussion so that people could become more experts on the process. I feel like I learn more. I feel like I've learned more from our neighbors as well, from our nonprofits. So I appreciate you all being here tonight and sharing that expertise.
Madam Mayor. Yeah, I'd like to just echo the comments of our fellow council members, and we'll be supporting the motion put forth tonight by Council President Nash. Going into this, I was hoping that we would have a little bit more time to get some of these plans in place and to look at them. But unfortunately, it's not the case in this situation. What I was very excited to hear tonight is from our experts out in the field and also from our fire department. What gives me the most confidence in approving this where it's at is to know the robust steps and the confidence in our Boise Fire Department. They will ensure that the hazard mitigation plans will be in place. They have a program for Code Red that will allow to notify residents, and probably putting in some additional protocols in place. And knowing the interaction and the response and the high level of professionalism within our police department gives me the utmost confidence to approve this tonight.
Madam Mayor. Thank you. I want to thank all of our neighbors who provided feedback tonight, Mary, Rebecca, Lisa, all of you. And not even just tonight, but planning and zoning. And even more so, I think we got so many messages that could probably have filled this room if all of them were here tonight. And just very grateful. Beyond that gratitude, also just very proud to be your closest neighbor up here on the dais. Really thankful for you and all you do for our communities. Myself, multiple family members, and many neighbors live within 2 miles of this facility as well. And we moved to this area prior to the 2008 Amity Road fire. And so, we did lose a community member that we still remember, and multiple homes. And we're grateful for the work that Idaho Power does do in this area to decrease fuels. Some of the other efforts mentioned the PSPS. When we think about those perfect storms of that evening, high heat, high wind, being able to shut down these systems is really, really important. And so just to tack on my expectations is that, if we're worried about embers flying around, that these systems have been shut down already at that point. I will just echo the things that have been set up here about our current legal obligations. At this point, we're only able to review the prior hearing record to determine if planning and zoning decision violates the law, exceeds authority, lacks substantial evidence, or is arbitrary. And after reviewing this, I found no specific errors there, and so I must support the motion to reject the appeal. But I do share all of the similar worries and concerns. Obviously, a lot of work's gone in to help mitigate a lot of those, and I think that work, as planning and zoning found, made them feel comfortable that this could be built in this area. But I share the wonder that should it be, but as noted, our hands are a bit tied right now in terms of kind of the new feedback that we received, and we did get a lot of that new feedback tonight. And I am committed to ensuring our Boise Fire Department and city will stay abreast of the maintenance, mitigation, and response practices and actions that can help provide myself, my family, all of our neighbors the assurance of safety that we should have. And I really hope the connections made through this effort won't end after tonight. There is more to this application process, but even beyond kind of this development process, that connection, the work that you can do as a neighborhood, even at the street level, to stay on top of the oversight of this project, emergency response preparation. Very grateful for all that Councilmember Stead is doing for our neighborhoods in that regard, and just unrelated social connection that brings the vibrancy and love that we have in our neighborhoods. So I just want to thank you for all you do, and I look forward to working with you as we do take into account a lot of the information that was shared tonight, maybe not specifically to this project, but we can't apply it to this project tonight, but we can apply it in all of the work that we do going from here to serve this area and to serve this facility and its neighbors. Thank you.
Madam Mayor. First of all, I know that there's been a lot of effusive praise. I just want to tell you, we are citizens like you. That is our government system. That's what makes it great. We're citizens. We're not experts. We learn every time folks come in before us. And even with that rich record that was presented to us, you heard there were still a lot of additional questions and a lot of clarifying questions. And I hope that shows that we're not taking this lightly and that we're really trying to do our jobs. I am struggling. I do not like these rules. I don't like them at all. I would have preferred a deferment. I think that would have given me some more comfort to just sit with this for a little bit and review what I heard tonight. My favorite president said, you should trust but verify. And I don't have the ability to verify some of the things I heard tonight. That's the system that we've been given, and I wish it was different. I don't like it. But it's the rules, and we have to live by the rules. And if I could change the rules, I would condition this, because I heard things that I would want if I was in your neighborhood, and I try to think that way because I might live in a different part of Boise, but we all love Boise and we all want it to be great and we all breathe the same air. So I wish I could condition it. I can't. And that makes me mad. So I am very much looking forward to some new rules that will give us some more tools so that we can respond to you in a way that you deserve. And I wish we could do that here tonight. So thank you for coming. It's almost 10 o'clock at night. You have lives. You've probably worked a full day. You got families. I just appreciate you coming, because when people stop coming, then we're in trouble. So thank you.
Just before the clerk calls a roll, I wanted to say a couple things too. I won't be voting tonight, and it was pointed out to me that the last time I said that, it sounded like it was a choice that I get to choose when I vote and when I don't. So I want to clarify that I only vote, and it was for the folks that you guys saw earlier today that were asking for the reconsideration. I only vote when there's a tie. But I want to acknowledge the work that went into the discussion that we had tonight. I've did it a little bit beforehand, but truly it does matter. Way back in the day, I worked for a conservation group, and I worked in the Magic Valley, and I was here in Boise and worked on, excuse me, I'm so tired. I'm terrible with words after 9:30. Worked on siting facilities for electric facilities and power plants. And there were many times that I was on the other side of this dais in my early 20s, trying to come up with the arguments for why things didn't make sense being proposed where they were. And so I know how it feels to be on that side, to be looking up at us, and also know the work and like focus and intention that goes into the testimony and the arguments that were made. So I want to acknowledge that, and also acknowledge that this council isn't being flippant right now when they say they wish they could put conditions on. They would. this is the first time we've weighed something of such import where conditions haven't been put on. You know, I've got a list that I expected to see conditions put on. But then remember that because of the Supreme Court ruling, we can't. The P&Z needed to put those conditions on. This council and my office intends to address that. And in the coming weeks, there'll be some changes to the CUP process, but it wouldn't make a difference in this one. Because of the timing issue. So I just want to be clear about that when we're saying this, we are going to be proposing changes to the process that allow this body to add those conditions that when they see fit after hearing from the public and weighing new information. I do appreciate the discussion that we had today on safety and mitigation. And I would like to be very clear that our fire codes dictate the plans that must be created, how they are implemented, and that I will be directing staff after this vote and as this moves forward to work through that process, but then to be very clear in terms of implementation, enforcement, but ultimately training so that we are prepared to mitigate as we must and take care of people, which is always our North Star. So thank you both to the company. I both appreciate the intention and concerns of the residents and the aspiration and need to create clean power sources to fuel our communities and growth as we move forward. And it's this push-pull that we find ourselves in right now. But really appreciate the dialogue, the discussion, and just want to close with a thanks and reiteration that this fire department will work fully through these plans that Kathy would have liked to have seen tonight before anything can happen and operate. And then we will be prepared with training and implementation to execute on what's been decided this evening. Thank you. Clerk?
Stead.
Yes.
Willis.
Yes.
Corliss.
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
Morales.
Yes.
Nash.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Take a motion to adjourn.
Madam Mayor, I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.